And if you have eyes like mine, you can't hardly see it. Let's please stand and do the pledge of allegiance in spirit and knowing our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, if we can take a moment of silence, please. Okay, well, what a nice facility. This is wonderful. And I'm expecting for a productive day. Mr. Izzer, I'm going to turn this over to you at this point.
All right, that sounds great. So good morning, everybody. My name is Ross Izzer. I'm going to be facilitating the retreat today. Just for background, for those of you who don't know me, I've been working in education policy in the States for about the last 15 years. My background is primarily in policy analysis and in government affairs. And I also, just by accident, spent a lot of time working on nonprofits and government entities, and therefore spent a lot of time in meetings not unlike this one. I do a lot of meeting facilitation, so some of that is strategic work, some of it is retreats like this one, sometimes it's just facilitating more meetings that need a little bit of extra help staying smooth. But my role today is to, number one, make sure that we're going to stay on the agenda. Number two, make sure that discussions are hitting the points that we need to hit so we can get out of here and have a really productive day. With everything being said that needs to be said, and things that we need to hit, we get. And then also to sort of lead us through the discussions with my platforms. We've got an agenda that's fairly straightforward, there's nothing on there that's incredibly complex. That doesn't mean that we won't have discussions, it doesn't mean that items won't come up, we don't want to talk about. My job is to make sure those conversations go smoothly, and that we're all being respectful to each other, and we're making our way through the agenda in an orderly fashion. So, yes, okay.
Mr. Izzer, just so you know, the echo in this room is particularly bad. You have a very low registered voice. So I would ask the members of all board members to just speak a little more slowly.
Okay, that sounds great.
I'm not sure. This is the HVAC, right? Is everyone warm?
Yeah,
Can we turn this off?
I think it's the fire thing.
I can turn the fire off. Is it fire? Yes. And just push the. I can't hear where it's coming from, but it's noise. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I
just adjusted my hearing. Mine's not just.
I think it's other people here.
Yeah,
Well, everyone keep that in mind until this thing gets tired. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. You go. And I'll do my best to speak in here. I go out the backside of the cold, so if I go current wrong, I'll speak as loudly as I can. So, a couple of things here. It doesn't need to be super formal. If you want to stop on anything, we'll talk about anything. If you have questions, if you have concerns, please just bring them up. You can throw something at me, you can hand at me, whatever you need to get attention. But I don't want you to feel like we're holding this training. We can spend some time on these items and work our way through them as needed. Obviously, bathroom breaks, we don't have any specifically included. I'm sure we'll take a break at it, so if we start getting there, give me a signal. And also feel free to grab some coffee, get water, whatever you need to do as we go through. And then if there's anything that comes up along the way, Ken or Tim, feel free to hop in. We can stop and pause and anything we need to. Or like details saying with Chairman Bates here. So, with that said, we'll go ahead and hop in. I don't think we need to do introductions for everybody else again, unless you want to. I suspect everybody knows it.
I think that's probably right, Mr. Farmer. You should probably introduce yourself.
Okay, sure. Yeah, no, happy to. I'm Tim Farmer. I'm with Brad Miller, school district attorney. My quick background about me: I have worked in and around education pretty much my whole career. So I actually, my first job out of high school when I graduated high school was as a substitute teacher in Louisiana, where I'm from. All you need to be a substitute teacher is a high school diploma. So I started substitute teaching. But in fact, I just think about it the other day. I used to pay $40 a day for an 8 hour first day. And I thought I was getting overrun then. I sit here conditioning all day. Sure, be the other substitute teacher, college at LSU, actually became a school teacher, 7th grade reading for several years in Florida. Somehow I had a crazy idea I wanted to be a lawyer, so went to law school, went to law school at DU. Went to the night program and worked part-time in an education nonprofit every day. And I've been an education attorney since 2015. So one way or another, I served in education pretty much my whole career. Obviously now a parent. I'm also I have a son on the autism spectrum, so I work with a school in Nevada, church in Nevada. They're working for a greater school that serves specifically students on the autism spectrum. So, you know, just a variety of tasks: parent, board member, lawyer, teacher, education nonprofit. I've seen education in a lot of different ones. I like to think that makes me sort of unique to qualify for my role as an education attorney. But yeah, so we're having some good conversation.
Okay. So with that, we can go ahead and jump into the first item, which is reviewing core beliefs and discussing direction and vision. Before we do this one, I'll do a necessary caveat, which is that sometimes this can seem a little corporate and a little irritating, because there's statements that are on the websites, things that we have on pieces of paper. And sometimes there's a tendency to just breeze right through them, read through them, everybody needs to thumbs up, that says okay, and then we move on. While we're here at the retreat, we're just trying to set sort of its direction and its goals for the coming year and months ahead. It's good for us to actually engage with this one, so I'm going to sit down and read the first round. We'll start with the purpose statement.
So quickly, just a point of order, because I see people. So here's what happened. I put together a slideshow, and then I learned that you weren't going to have a projector. And so I was like, fine, we'll go old school, we'll print them out. You'll see those, and you'll also see that they're really hard to read. Once I printed them all out, I was like, oh man, most people have like their bifocals, they're not going to read that. So you'll have the slide deck, and then I also printed out an outline that's a little easier to read. And the way that it works is you'll see like a little box 1, box 2, box 3. That's basically slide 1, slide 2, slide 3, slide 4. So if we say, turn to slide 7, or turn to slide 8, that's the way you navigate it. This will probably be the document you work off of. If you like working on the slide deck, that's fine too. But it'll probably be this one.
Yeah, it is.
And for slide 6 and 7.
This one will be 7 and 7, and yeah. So we at the bottom of page 2 on the document that Tim mentioned. I'm going to read this one through, and then I guess just take a minute or two, chew on it, think about it, mark it up, see a lot of the activities we're in. We'll come back and we'll chat about the purpose statement first, and then we'll work our way over to the core beliefs, and we'll do those separately.
One last quick one, just school note. Most of the slides are basically referenced back to policies, and so you'll see parentheses. As you look through, it's like GP2, this one is P. So if you want to see the actual policy, you have to have to print all of those out. That got brought. But even if you had taken notes and stuff like that, that's what those little parentheticals are referenced to, is the actual policy.
So we'll start with the purpose statement. Again, this is the purpose of the school district. It's the raison d'etre, the reason that it exists. Woodland Park School District exists to establish a common foundation of knowledge that cultivates educated citizens who appreciate and contribute to this great American Republic as provided in the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution. Through a rigorous culture of achievement and an ethical code of conduct, students will develop personal discipline, courage, and drive, and willingness to work respectfully with others, and equipped to be successful members of the uniquely American society. So we can spend a couple minutes thinking about that, chew on it, and then I can come back and have a discussion about that statement before we move on to the core beliefs. should just be an open discussion, so I don't think it needs to be overly formal. Mr. President, I don't know if we would like to take this opportunity beyond that, being able to go through and just our mind about the city, whether or not we think the language here is hitting the right tones, whether that's the direction. And ultimately, the goal here at the end of it is to say that we are all on the same page about this purpose and what we move forward with this purpose as a board. Without that, obviously, everything gets complicated. We know what the purpose and reason to be. So that's where we're trying to get, but that doesn't mean that we can't talk about it and make changes. We think about
I personally think it's well written, it expresses our objectives. Anyone have thoughts or questions about it?
Well, I was just thinking, we only have the word student in there once. And as an educational body, I feel like we should put our focus on the students. So I was just thinking, maybe one place in that first sentence there that the district exists, maybe we could add in to provide students with a common foundation instead of establish a common foundation.
Would it include educated students then? That's very.
Maybe, but just making sure our focus is on the students, right? Like that's where the emphasis. And with only having students in there, once it gets a little convoluted.
Yeah, I thought on that note, actually, Sue and I were tasked to put this together originally and then have discussion on it. We did that last year.
We spent 3 months and there was like joint sessions and tabling and words and community. And you guys separately for
If we were to put student inside in there, what we want is educated student citizens or citizen students. I think that's what we want to have. We want to have, and the goal of this is to equip our students to be successful members of our society. So, citizen student, student citizen, I don't know if we were to edit and put another student in there, I think either one of those places would be okay to do that.
Well, I think the beginning of it is fine. Foundation of knowledge of cultivated, educated citizens, and it goes down further to through the students.
ultimately under 18 and graduating and we want them to be productive members and be citizens of the society. I think whatever they do, that's what it's uniquely American society because we have a lot of students who don't go to college. We have a lot of students who do missionary work and other stuff. So
I personally prefer the term citizens. That's what we're doing, is helping these young people establish their place as a citizen and educated citizen. So I personally prefer citizen over student.
I agree.
May I make a comment? This is entirely voice discussion.
Can you talk louder? I'm sorry.
I absolutely will. Thank you for saying that. I know that this is the board's decision. I just want to point out that from this perspective, I appreciate the fact that the focus on this is preparation of the student body to become something, right? The students aren't the citizens yet necessarily, but aren't the educated citizens who appreciate the great republic yet. But that's what we're cultivating.
But that's what comes, those citizens.
Exactly. So I do like the phrase the way it's stated, just as a note. The other point was, I underscored what I felt like were some of the most important elements here. And I love this because it describes a cultural environment that we're able to work and consistently drive through the school district and cultivate in our students. Students who have a common foundation of knowledge, i.e. a sense of this place, this country that they're a part of, a culture of achievement, an ethical code of conduct, personal discipline, courage, and working respectfully in order to be and being successful members of the American society. I love this purpose, and it allows us to drive education in a strong way, in a way to prepare all of our students to succeed in life.
I agree with that. I think that is well written, and as a whole, I think it speaks to exactly what we're here to accomplish. And we do want them to be educated citizens, so I would like to leave it as it is.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously we want to make it citizens, right, that's the end goal. I think, maybe where we're different is just in how to get there. Like, in my opinion, and my way of seeing things, if you focus on the child where they are now, and having that focus and that we're providing the students with this education to help them become that. Right now, we're just saying we just want educated citizens, but we don't really say we're going to focus on the student where they are now to help them achieve that. That's just where I think that language changes things a little bit.
Well, I think that's important that we are actually doing exactly that because our goal is to, we can't have the objective goal without that being, I think it's not just things.
So, Director Parker, if you don't mind, is your concern with the fact that that first sentence is not directly targeted in terms of the word established, and you say Woodland Park School District exists to establish a common foundation of knowledge? Is the concern that it's not that common foundation of knowledge is attached specifically to students, for instance?
Well, just that in the first sentence of the school's vision, we don't mention students at all. And as a school, students are why we exist, so it feels like that should be in the language.
I think it raises the students up, and I think calling them educated citizens raises them up to a higher level. You can't go any higher that we are putting our citizens, our children at the highest by calling them citizens and not just students.
So if for instance, that purpose statement where we're going to say Woodland Park School District exists to provide students with a common foundation of knowledge that cultivates education, educated citizens, you think that would address the concern that you're getting at?
That was a simple change that I thought would help.
Okay.
But, I mean, I was open to rewording that and really feel that was the best turn of phrase, but I thought it was an easy place to add it.
Could you say that again, please, Mr. Rizzo?
Yeah, Woodland Park School District exists to provide students with a common foundation of knowledge that cultivates educated citizens, and then everything is saying after that. Just so it's a little bit more of a target statement, I think it's really big.
Yes. Make sure I focus on the students to help them become
I know that modifying the statement will be it's a separate process to go through and do that. As far as general agreement with the main thrust of it, it seems like, it seems like we have one sort of the general direction of the statement, which is that it's not just about students today, that's obviously the focus, that's what the school district does, but it's about preparing for the future and all the ways that the purpose is laid out there. Is there anything that the folks think that we're missing? Is there anyone that has an issue with that general sort of future-oriented purpose or drive?
The last one, I think, has an information. No problem changing it if doesn't include it, since it's changed, we keep it the same. Figure that out, but we have these things printed and we're going to question this as well. So if you just stroking one word for optics and not actually changing the rest of the content, I would go through the process of changing personally.
I was thinking the same thing.
Good observation. I mean, I was going to say, okay, well, if we take established out, are we losing something? But due to the fact, I think this is a very minor change, it doesn't really change our objectives around this table. So let's leave it the way it is. Thanks, Mike.
For the thoughts or comments about the purpose statement before we move on to the core beliefs? Okay. So we'll jump over to slide 8. It's on the next page, page 3. It starts with deep believing and a series of these. I'm actually going to do these one at a time. I don't want, so I'll read one of the same thing. And then there's thinking about it, looking at it, come back and discuss them each on their own. If you have something to say, that's great. If they're perfect and we don't have anything to say about one, we move on to the next one. But I want to make sure that we spend some time on each one so we're localized and we're ready. So, to kick us off, we believe in district philosophies that rely on political choice and build systems oriented to political expectations and values and acknowledge parents as the primary educators of their children.
Did you say we're going to discuss that as we go, or at the?
Yes, so we'll take a minute just to think about that particular point, and then we'll come back and discuss that on its own before we move on to the next.
Can I ask one more point of clarification or not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Will we be discussing the statement or discussing how we achieve that, or topics surrounding that, for instance?
So for today, we'll be talking about just the statement itself. But I think that there is a conversation to be had there about if these are your core beliefs and beliefs that guide your operations in the school district, are you doing it and how do you see it reflected back in the school district? So I think that's where we're putting on the conversation.
So that,
But probably not full operational discussion about precisely how we're doing it for today. Is what we've got next.
We're just going through these to see if these are still our beliefs. Each of these statements. Do that?
yes.
As far as that first one goes, I don't know if any changes to it. Anyone else? Okay.
Good. Number 2 is soliciting and collaborating with parents, staff, teachers, students, and community to inform our actions which align with the merit and mission of the student.
Anyone got a question regarding that one, comment? Good.
Okay. Offering a variety of programs to provide content-rich curriculum and extracurricular activities. Developing professional educators that engage and inspire students through positive ethical leadership. Continuous improvements of our district programs, processes, and academic results. And finally, the future success of our community, state, and nation depends on an educated citizen who understands the Constitution of the United States and the state of Colorado.
Comments?
Okay.
If I can just comment, then I would just like to say that I would appreciate the clarity of these points. I've worked with a number of school districts over the years with these kinds of discussions, and it is very rare to find a district that clearly articulates the goal and the direction and the culture that they want to maintain. And I really deeply appreciate of this board and the way it's situated.
I was not on this board when these were created, but they were public documents, and I really appreciate the work that went into creating these. I think it's a whole package for our goals and objectives.
Did take a lot of time discussion with Ms. Hamlin and Ms. Tyson were part of that. They really helped all work and activities, and it was a lot of discussion. I guess it was 3 months of working for these together. So
I just have to say that Karen Hamlo and Tina Gassens did a great job helping us had never gone through a process like that, and it was very interesting. I enjoyed it a lot. Really made me focus on things.
And then I was talking to feedback, which I was really good, so thank you. But
I think it's very, I'm excited to kind of establish as a board the goals to help us measure, making sure we're actually achieving those goals. I think it's a great place to start.
Okay, any further comments about core beliefs before we move on? All right. We're going to move into probably slightly less exciting, but really important stuff to talk about, which is operating orders, board policies, and specifically how meetings will run as the meetings we board. So it tends to be the longest one, so just let me chime in as we go. Save those discussions, any questions, you can let us know. And
I think this is going to be the most exciting part.
you guys are over.
Okay, so again, I had to set up kind of a slide deck, but so before we get started, I want to talk first about some of the expectations for what we're going to be talking about. Really, it's supposed to just be kind of a general overview of, I was in broad categories, roles and responsibilities of the board, and there's a variety of subcategories underneath that we'll talk about. I tried to root it all to talk about in your guys' existing policy, right? Like I didn't necessarily, I'm not happy to talk about best practices. Unfortunately, it's a large part of my job to sit at a lot of board meetings. So I've seen kind of good, bad, and ugly, very functional boards that work really well, experienced very dysfunctional boards that don't work so well. So I've learned a lot from just sitting at board meetings and observing. So I'm happy to share best practices, but I also want us to be rooted in your policies that you guys have sort of mutually agreed that these are going to be the policies that guide the work that we do together. So this is very heavy in that direction. But as we talk through some of the topics, I'm happy to share with you best practices, or certainly if you guys have questions. A lot of this stuff isn't necessarily written in stone. If there is something that's legally required or has to be a certain way, we can talk about that. But by and large, a lot of this stuff is just sort of what you guys have board mutually agreed, like this is how we're working on our business. Okay. Meant to be a discussion. There's some built-in questions in here, kind of similar to what Ross was doing. What we want to hear from you all. We don't want to sit here and talk conversational. Don't hesitate to stop me at any time, interrupt, do whatever. Again, I want this to be dialogue and conversation. Typical lawyer disclaimer, this is going to be a substitute for legal advice. So if down the road specific questions come up, I would still invite you to seek legal counsel. But specific questions, most of the time it's going to be very fact intensive and fact specific. Even though we're talking generally about some principles today, if you ever get into a situation where you're not totally sure what the answer is, requires. Okay, so first question. The other thing is, this was supposed to be a slide deck, I've said it 5 times, but it was going to be a question, right? And then you guys were going to try and answer it, and then we were going to move to the slides that was going to provide the answer, so don't look ahead. What are the roles and responsibilities? How would each of you articulate the answer to that question? How do you guys view your role? So I say that again. How do you view the role? What do you view as the role of the board in the school district? And how would you answer that question? What you guys do?
the direction and vision for
You know, okay.
no, I mean,
I'd say we're also that bridge between the community and the school district, that the point of contact that will drive the conversation. Getting a pulse of our community wants in the direction that they want to go as well, and then helping drive that to help also the community as a whole.
Governance body.
Okay.
Through an election or appointment determines voice of people to, and to go forward with our goals and our vision through that election process. And represent, I believe we represent the parents of the constituents. In his direction, our goals to represent
I think for me, I see it as first and foremost, I'm an elected servant of the people of the district. And that during campaign, I talked about my virtues, values, and the things that are important to me. So those people who were aligned with that idea voted, and now I sit here. It doesn't mean, in my mind, it does not mean that I don't listen to people who are opposed, because it ends up I spend more time with people who are opposed or troubled with some things than otherwise. And I want to hear those ideas and those thoughts just as well. So I see myself first and foremost as a servant in an elected office. The next thing is to work within the constraints of the law. And with the school board, they are broad and sweeping authority that the school board in the state of Colorado has. So with those two things in mind, how the governance of a school within those parameters is what we have to do. So how do we represent the interests of the people within the constraints of my virtues, values, and integrity, within the constraints of the law, and make the school the most successful educational institution that it can possibly be. So that's what I believe my position is on a school board and how a school board should function. And that, of course, looks much different from one community to another.
Any other thoughts? Okay, so if you look then at slide 4, bullet point 4, you guys have pretty much all of the right things, right? So right there at the top, the district, your overarching goal, I would say, is to make sure that the district is accomplishing its purpose, right? Like we just talked about the purpose and the beliefs. At the highest level, y'all's job is to make sure all the pieces are in place for that purpose to be accomplished. Beyond that, I highlighted words like you said, the vision. You encourage diversity of viewpoints. You focus on strategic leadership. You make sure that the role between the board and the superintendent is clearly defined. You make collective decisions, future orientation, govern proactively in the sense of, you should always be sort of looking ahead, right, in order to meet your mission and vision. There's words like values, perspectives, I heard you all say, making sure that we are, I like this one, this was in GP3, that your focus is on the long-term benefit of students, right? Again, kind of back to that purpose statement, right? It's not just, we want you to be a straight A student right now. We want you to be an educated citizen that's going to be a contributing member of society in the future, right? I think those are, you guys hit on all of those. And then the last one that I highlighted, and I think this is really important. You select and hold accountable your superintendent. I often tell boards that's often one of the most important decisions that boards make, is who the superintendent's going to be, how that relationship's going to work, the expectations you set for the superintendent, and then how you hold the superintendent accountable to those expectations. Because at the end of the day, most boards meet at most twice a month, sometimes only once a month. Right? There's only so much that you all can do as your superintendent that is going to really be one carrying out those directives in a way that will help you be successful or not. So I think that's a really important part when we talk about the role of the board and the responsibility of the board.
Okay, so that's at a very high level. The next part is going to talk about the actual job description that you guys have written for the board. Before we move on to that, any other thoughts on sort of this high level role and responsibility of the board? Awesome. Okay. Okay, so you guys actually have a job description for board members. It's GP2 is the policy. So I won't just read through it, but just kind of again hit some of the highlights. I think this was said by a couple of you also. Make sure there's an effective link between the district's owners, which means community members and taxpayers, and the operation of the district, right? Bridge was used. Relevant values the boards are represented as representatives of the community. Are most explicit, or at least a couple of them you mentioned this room. Values, making sure you're reflecting the values of the community. And then again, the actual performance of the district matches what the board expects. So that accountability. Moving on to slide 6. Ensuring input from students, staff, parents, and other citizens. I think a few of you guys hit on that, which I thought was good.
Which number were you on right there?
Number 2.
You're
Sorry,
on
slide 6, 2.
Okay.
No.
Ensure.
Develop and modify as needed for government policies, including the district purpose statement, which we talked about. The end result is desired, so the goals were mentioned. Do you guys have goals right now? Have you guys written goals?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
Okay. I think that could be a good action item that you guys may want to take from today to work on.
David and I talked about this a little bit yesterday.
Yeah. I think it's a good next step, right? I mean, to accomplish a lot of this stuff. Having some type of goal framework. Which would be those expectations, make sure the authorities delegate, which is a superintendent piece, and then again back to accountability. The last thing I'll highlight here, because some of it's redundant, is number 5, ensure board performance. So do you guys have a self-evaluation process? That can be another good.
I
Prior
think
boards did that on those. Because I know prior boards have, had meetings regularly about it.
I know it's in our GPs.
Yeah, you do. There's
We
one
do.
action.
But having actually done it, I don't recall having done it.
Yeah, that can be the type of thing, like
At least not formally done.
Yeah, it's usually, so the board I sit on, we do it quarterly. So at the same time, you don't want to do it so often that it becomes, taking a survey almost, right? Like you do it too frequently, you just kind of really go through it. And then it all culminates in like an annual board self-evaluation. It's just, having goals helps because we have goals to sort of measure against and how are we accomplishing those goals and all those sorts of things. Can be a good to do, so to speak, for this.
Maybe before the end of today, we can set up or schedule some form of working session where we can set these goals, just kind of, we all come together with some goals we have and then do a bit of an evaluation thus far and then set the cadence.
Well, we need to do this as a group, so yes, we
Yeah.
have to set something up.
Yeah.
Right,
people
well,
just
just
frame,
walk
yeah.
away from today with one kind of on the books, I think would be good.
Well, I would like that. And that's kind of what Mick and I were talking about last night, was that exact thing.
Perhaps you want to add into the June agenda, which is kind of a wrap-up session for the year.
I think that'd be a good place to maybe inform people what we come up with, but we may want to take a little bit more time than, instead of that board meeting with other things to have those discussions.
But we can talk about that after we wrap this up. I did think there should be a plan for goal setting, and I don't know how long this is going to take. It's just going to take a little time. Got it. Noted.
Okay.
I'd be part of the group.
Any other thoughts about board roles, responsibilities, job of the board? Because we're going to kind of shift a little bit in focus.
Well, my mind is racing with all kinds of ideas about, questions of that. One thing, we have policies in place that we are able to change with the majority vote of the board at any time. But I think that would be an important conversation to have. And then holding each other, how do we also hold members accountable to our policy guidelines? We're not just all lone rangers out there doing our own thing. We only count when we're all together, except for listening ears. We're listening ears throughout the community, but we bring this together. So how do we work together on these ideas and hold each other accountable to that? I think is something that I would hope will be part of that conversation.
Well, that is part of today's agenda, is to go over our governance processes. I'm sure everyone here has read those, but we will hit on those today to make sure we all understand and are following those guidelines. Okay.
But that would be my only comment.
I was just going to say that's a great segue. So we talked about purpose statement and core beliefs. And the reason that landed here in the slide, like we started at the beginning, the reason that kind of landed here is because it's, if you almost think of it as like a pyramid, right? Like it's at the top. And we're going to talk about how that really should be what influences everything sort of that flows from that. Okay, so we're going to talk next about policy governance. And we start with the question.
Which slide are we on?
Sorry, 9. What is policy governance?
It's a governing body that follows their policies, or implements policies according to their visions. And there's action to follow through.
Yeah?
Our guidelines.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Well, there's different ways of governance, so we're not like policies, we govern by policies, that's why we're calling policy governance board.
Right.
And policies that are aligned with our purpose statement, our core values, and our vision. So it all comes together.
Other programs different ways, we don't have to run a board or policy governance, like we can totally throw all this out, but we do, we hold it, so that we all have a voice.
I think isn't a big part of policy governance is that we set the policy and the board does not take direct action in the school, but through the superintendent, and the superintendent is the one who directs and makes the decisions within the guidelines of the policy and of the board's directives. So in other words, we don't directly hire someone, or there's no direct action, but always funnel through the. Is that primarily what the umbrella of policy governance is?
Yeah. So a way of thinking about it, this analogy doesn't always hold up, but I think it's a good way of thinking about it. You all are the legislature. You guys are the legislative body, right? Your superintendent is the executive, right? We all heard the 3 branches of government: judicial, legislative, executive, right?
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, so you guys write the laws. You guys write the policies, right? And then you expect your executive to carry them out, right? So how do you govern the district? We govern the district by writing policies. And then we empower the superintendent to carry those out, right? Like, you all aren't, at least I hope not, you guys aren't in the classroom evaluating teachers, right? No. You guys aren't sitting in the principal's office when a kid needs to be disciplined, right? Like, you guys aren't. That's not how you govern. You govern by writing policies that are going to inform those actions that happen on a day-to-day basis. But you aren't actually carrying them out. That's policy. policies, right? And this is really important for a board to understand, because this is like, you know, you hear people say, oh, stay in your lane, things like that. Like, this is the important thing to understand. Yeah, like what is your authority as a board? Well, by and large, your authority is to write policies, and then those policies, you select your superintendent, and the superintendent carries forward the policies that you set.
I very much like that analogy. I mean, that breaks this down, and it covers a lot of issues that we come up against. Whereas, you know, we've got to set the policies, but our employee here, it's his job to do that work. And oftentimes boards have a tendency to go around our executive and take actions that really aren't under us. We have one employee, and I know there's been problems with this in the past, and we've seen some already, to where I think that's a good example of what our responsibilities are, and that puts a lot on our one employee's shoulders. But that's why we select the superintendent to set intended or attendance that we do. So that was good. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's,
There's always a misconception, you know, in public, and trying to explain that if they're not, you know, if they don't pay attention to the board, that don't understand policy governance, let them know how that, like, top-down situation flows. So, it's trying to get that out to the public too, because we don't necessarily micromanage every single thing. We're not going to the,
Sure.
We're not going to the teacher. We have like a system in place.
right, you set the framework, right, within which all of that day-to-day decision making is going to happen, but you're not the one actually executing the decisions. Yeah.
And I think going back to what we just discussed before is board performance evaluation. Has the board been compliant to our own policies? And I think that evaluation is important, because I've heard that a number of times. Are we being challenged with, are we following our own policies? So I think that conversation in the future will be important.
Yeah, that's all part of that board self-evaluation. Or are the policies we've been working on, are they achieving the goal that we set out, our purpose, right? And if not, then we need to rethink some of those.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, still on slide 10, that first quoted section. So the board will instruct the superintendent how? Through written policies, which prescribe the district purpose statement. So what's going to inform written policies is the purpose statement. And then allowing the superintendent to use any reasonable interpretation of his policies. The next one, the board will develop policies which set expectations the superintendent should exercise in choosing the district meetings. These are called executive expectations policies. They're EE, I think there's 13 of them that you guys have currently. And then the superintendent is authorized to establish all further policies, make all decisions, and take all actions to establish all practices and all activities. So again, you set the framework, and then you delegate to your superintendent the ability to reasonably interpret those policies. He can write more policies, and I think there are quite a number of policies that the superintendent.
Administrative policies.
Yeah, so the administrative policies that the superintendent has stewardship over, and you know, as is written here, make all decisions, day-to-day decisions, delegate authorities, delegate is obviously to one person. Can't do everything, and so having that responsibility to delegate that as needed.
So it's almost like a business. We are the board over a business. He has the role of essentially CEO, because he is the chief operating officer of all of our district schools.
Right. Yeah, another good analogy. Yeah.
And I think that's one place that, as a board, we can improve in this. Is I underlined here, the board will instruct the superintendent through written policies. A lot of times we have conversations, but we never put it into words and down on paper. And I think that that's important for us to do, because we had that with the previous superintendent where we didn't do that, and yet, I think that that's really important to put it into writing what the expectations are. Because if we just say it, it's just floating out there, and it's not good. So anyway, I don't have to really talk about that. Written
Yeah, and spend some time if you haven't with those EE policies. In preparation for this, I read through all the policies and I can read through some of those, but I think they are really key for you all doing your job. Right? And this, you guys have agreed like this is how we, accomplish the district purpose is through these written policies, providing direction in that manner. So being familiar with those EE policies and refining those to the extent they need to be refined, maybe they don't, but to the extent they need to be refined, I think is important as well. Okay, so going on to 11, we talked about it a little bit, this notion that as a board you all you function as a legislative body, right? Individually, you don't have any authority other than authorities that have been delegated to you as a board, which does occur sometimes. But if the board has a delegated authority to you, then you don't have any authority individually, but collectively, right? They're actually very powerful collectively. So just being mindful of that, and to tie it to policy, only decisions the board acting as a board body or by the superintendent. BSR2, decisions and instructions of individual board members, obstacle committees are not binding, except in rare instances when the board is specifically authorized to exercise authority. When this, I'll tell you instances I've seen where this happens, and this isn't prescriptive or even necessarily best practice, but just to make you think of like, gosh, when did that ever happen? I've seen boards set up search committees, right, if you're hiring a superintendent. I've seen boards set up evaluation committees, right, like we want to revamp our superintendent evaluation. It's really clunky and hard to do, like at board meetings. Let's appoint one board member and two other people that are going to come together. And they can't approve the evaluation, but they're going to put it together and they're going to bring it back to the board. Those sorts of things. I've seen things like, hey, we've got a contract that needs to get signed. It's nearly done. It's in a substantially final form. The board's going to review it and approve it, and delegate authority to the board president to approve any final minor changes and then sign the contract. I've seen things like that. But again, if it hasn't been specifically delegated, then individual board members don't have the authority to bind the board, the school district, or the superintendent to do things. Everybody good on that?
I'm still on 11.
What's that?
I was 11.
Yes.
I don't think you said there's other rules.
Yeah, that's the next one we're going to move on to. Yes, that last quoted section. The board is one voice. Decisions about board policies, board matters, or on behalf of the board shall be made consulting the whole board and receiving majority board approval representing the board's one voice. So if you go through, and we'll actually talk about this in other sections when we have communications, but woven throughout y'all's policies is this reference to one voice. I think that the purpose of that is trying to acknowledge that let me say this, if you all are trying to accomplish your purpose, it's important that to the extent possible, you guys are pulling in the same direction. Now, having said that, I don't think that, I don't want anybody to interpret this, and I actually would say this is actually, to me, it's a symptom of an unhealthy board. I don't think anybody should interpret that to mean that every single vote you guys ever take has to be a unanimous vote, right? Like that's not how any legislative body that I'm familiar with that's healthy works. It's actually usually a symptom of like unhealthiness. If everything's a 5-0 vote, it just sweeps on through and like nobody ever, challenges or pushes back. Can we do this a little better? Or maybe, like that's actually, you want that in a good, healthy, functioning legislative body. But what you also want is once the majority has spoken, all right, let's all come together now. We've made our decision as a board as part of the legislative democratic process. Majority spoken, let's pull in the same direction towards accomplishing our goal. Doesn't mean that you're not allowed to disagree, right? Like I said, I think you should from time to time. If you guys are all doing your job appropriately, you should disagree from time to time. But that disagreement shouldn't hinder the work of the district, right? I think that's really the spirit of the one voice moniker that is threaded throughout, right? We can disagree without being disagreeable, and we can disagree but still try to pull in the same direction of accomplishing the board purpose that we all do. Thoughts, questions about that?
No, I mean, that's a must, it's a given. We've got to come out with one voice and a majority on that voice.
But it doesn't mean you have to agree on the vote, however, it means after the vote is taken by the majority, whichever direction that vote took, we all need to come together as a team to implement that, the vote that was taken, to adhere to our vision.
Well, you're speaking to item 7 on GP4, openly support majority decisions of the board. So we do need to speak with one voice.
Well, I can, in principle, yes, I would agree with that. And with this board, typically don't have a problem with that at all. But I can see circumstances that if it were to violate my virtues, what the board was doing, if I thought that they were doing something that was completely improper to the detriment of our children's society and culture, then I could not, in good conscience, support it. I look at school boards across the United States, specifically on the coasts, as in contrast with the heartland of the country. If I were on a board of directors in California, I could find myself quite frequently being opposed to things that may be happening. So, I'm just throwing that out there that I could not, in good conscience, at times, support what a board was doing.
Right, and I get what you're saying about talking about the coast, but that's one of the nice things about this board. I don't see or have seen a situation come up where we would be impacting a person's values, a particular board member's values in a final decision, that we're going to have some differing opinions in that conversation. No, there's no doubt about that. But when we come out of there, I would hope that we are all satisfied with the conclusion.
Well, that would certainly be my goal, yes.
Even if you're not satisfied, we're still a board and we work as one voice. So therefore, even if I was completely dissatisfied and the majority of the board voted that way, I would support the board and be on that accessible majority of what you guys represent would be a part of. So that's how I view it anyways.
Yeah, and as long as everyone's following to the best practices in the decision-making process, then I think that makes sense.
I mean, even in the board communication, it's just, if you're exercising honesty, you're putting it out there, you already have your thoughts, or in the board, whatever vote where you're going. But then after it's been taken, Director Patterson was saying that after the vote has been cast, the majority decision, we work as a policy governance board, which means for one voice.
Have you seen this come close to happening on this board previously?
No.
I mean, if we were on the board in Loudoun County, I could see where your comments would make sense, and I'm not sure I could sit on the board in one of those counties. But to my knowledge, we haven't encountered that yet on this board, even when I wasn't on this board. Thanks, David.
I'm going to put you to rest.
No, you've got to wait till restroom break.
I have to disagree with the decision of the board.
You can.
Okay.
All right, so we are on slide 12. So again, still in the same policy governance, and what policy governance looks like. So the board works collaboratively with and through the superintendent. So then just pulling some things from policy. So the board's sole connection to the operational organization of the school district is the superintendent. Authority and accountability of staff, as far as the board concerned, is considered the responsibility of the superintendent. If a board member desires information from the superintendent, do you guys know how to get that? At least according to the policy. If a board member desires information from the superintendent, the board president should bring that request to the next appropriate Board of Education meeting or work session, consideration by the board. Unless it's time sensitive, extremely urgent, like health safety stuff, that's basically what it goes on to say. So, I will tell you, this is what your policy says. So I don't know practices, I don't know if this is what you want your policy to continue to be, but basically what your policy says, if you want something from Mr. Witt, a board member, you contact board president puts it on a future agenda, they talk about it, and then, I will tell you this, I have seen boards do this particular process any number of different ways. These are the factors that you want to consider. Probably first and foremost, how do we know, if everybody's able to communicate directly with the superintendent and ask for something, how do we know if we're being overburdened with requests, right? So at a minimum, it's usually good to have like a sole person that's kind of clearing out, so to speak, of all of those requests. More minor requests, there's usually a little more flexibility, I guess I would say. This is something like, hey, Mr. Witt, at the next board meeting, can you bring a report of our past 5 years enrollment trends and what the reasons are for why they're going up or down. If everybody on the board just had sort of free reign to make a request such as that, it could potentially be all it does, right? So those are the things you want to think about. This is how your policy is currently written. Any thoughts about that?
No, we do, that is spoke to in our policies, and with the rare exception of something that is really urgent,
Right.
the board does need to go through the president, and then I will communicate with the superintendent as needed. And maybe I can solve the problem up front. That's easy for me to say, I've been gone for 2 weeks, but I will make an effort to resolve that. If I can, I will take the necessary actions until such time another meeting or something. It really depends, but it should be very rare to have to go directly to the superintendent. And we need to go through the superintendent for issues that we see. I mean, I have some good contacts within, particularly the high schools, that's where my grandson is. And it's tempting to, just go have a conversation, and trivial things is no problem. But if those are things that are, what would the word be, Mr. Witt, policy, or there's just, we need to have that respect.
When it's request for information, particularly, you want to make certain that A, if two different people want it, choose the request, that's the going through you piece. But B, that the response actually gets to all the boards, so some are wondering, well, others are getting informed.
Yes.
So that's the other piece of it. If it comes from one, and it gets responded to the board with the information. I would be less concerned about whether it needed to go to the next board meeting, or whether it just needed to go to the board as a response. That's the level of information, right? It's a small information request, and maybe we can just do it through the board president and send it back to the board. If it's a large information item, then maybe it belongs on an agenda and in the board meeting. But the two directions really are important. One, it's coming through a single source, so we know that the response goes back to everyone, and then everyone stays informed, and I don't get buried. I would appreciate both of those elements.
Now, one thing that is interesting, though, is that our policy is more restrictive than the statute. Because the statute gives each director broad sweeping authority to go and say, I want this document or this information, and it must be provided to the director.
But it doesn't say the route. We determine the route.
Yes, so what I'm saying is that our policy restricts us from what the statute allows. So there was always discussion previously with the previous board on that very point. That was very contentious at times, where information was, a particular director may want information that is available by statute, or he has the authority, or she has the authority to request, but our policy restricts it from being able to do that. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, and let me give another analogy. It's a governmental analogy. If as you were talking about that, if I mean, we've got to follow the Colorado Constitution, but it's not unusual at all to make policies that are stricter. We've got to hit that baseline. It's not unusual to have policies or local governments, stricter policies. I mean, there are things about, how you can use your land. The state says you can build build 3 houses on 35 acres. In Taylor County, you can only build 2. So the state's rule on that is stricter there. So that was the analogy I was using. True, the statute is similar, but we all agree to follow our policies, correct?
I agree, yes, and if we want to change that,
If you want to bring a policy to a board meeting, you still need to look at policy in the board meeting, and you can consider.
We could adjust it.
We have not gone through all the policies. Why some of these policies are written before this board?
We've gone through it, so they can go through and monitor right here, so it'll be good.
I couldn't hear what you
We're gonna go through and reread and edit if we need to, the rest of the policy.
I just couldn't hear you.
We have monitored in the ways we have previously, we just haven't always edit like every single one of them.
Well, these are things we can adjust as needed.
Well, I wasn't suggesting that, I was just throwing that out there, the issues that contribute to it.
All right. I think that's a good conversation. Like I said, I think there's flexibility in this area, it's just making sure everybody's on the same page in terms of what the practice is going to be in policy for making this kind of requests.
And lastly, I mean, if we've got a policy that isn't working, we need to adjust it so that we are following policy. We do want to adhere to our policy.
Absolutely.
Or delete it. So unless we all need to follow it, if there's something we don't like, then we need to change it so we can all adhere to that. Everyone understands.
Thank you. Okay, the last quoted area, kind of in the same vein. So individual board members are able to communicate, build relationships, or interact with staff. They have no influence or authority over them. Individual board members should not assess staff or direct them. Right, so again, you're delegated to the superintendent. He oversees staff, evaluates, makes decisions, provides direction, all those sorts of things.
And direct there means like giving assignments or telling them how to teach or how to.
Yeah. Yep.
Not necessarily just asking questions, that would be.
Yeah, you communicate with relationships, no influence or authority, yeah. Right. Well, this may be worth talking about for a second. What about asking for information from staff? I would read this as saying you can't do that, because that's going to be correct.
The policy is.
To me, that would have to go through the superintendent. Is there
You would ask the superintendent as he's overseeing them.
Right.
That would be considered an interaction.
Well, if they're expected, I would say it's a directive, if you're saying like, hey, produce this report for me, right? And you're a board member, so they're gonna feel a little like you're exerting authority over them, which also is no authority.
Or undermine.
I think this is saying, this is a good discussion, it's worth fleshing out here. I think this is saying that like, you can communicate, build relationships, or interact with it. Doesn't mean it's like, I can never talk to you, right? It's like, I can be friendly with you, I can talk to you, but I'm not your boss. Like, I can't direct you to do things, I can't require you to do things, I can't exert authority over you, that all falls through. Does that maybe make sense?
I'm glad you brought that up. I made that mistake. I reached out to some staff and had a question, and they said, well, let me refer it to the superintendent. I said, oh, that was
One obvious, I think it's obvious exception to this would be, and I happened a few years at a board meeting a week or two ago, right? Like if there's somebody at the podium, right, a CFO or whoever it was, like, it's not like, oh, we have to talk to the superintendent. Like, I think that's fine, right? But in terms of outside of the board meeting context, if you have a question for someone or something like that that's work related, I would think that probably goes to the superintendent.
You did.
I sort of open to hearing else, thinking that.
That also helps enforce the point I made earlier about making sure that when the information comes to the board, that it comes to the board, not just to an individual. And I help make sure that happens, so that's important.
Yeah, I think in a similar way to funneling communications to the superintendent and board president, funneling any potential communications to staff or superintendent, if nothing else, it's like a good clearinghouse to have, right? Because like, what if all of a sudden all board members were just pelting the CFO for information and nobody else knows about it except the CFO, and that person's going to feel compelled to respond because it's the board asking questions. So the superintendent can kind of say, hey, like this person's got an audit going on, they've got this going on, we'd love to get you this information, but like just give someone in that chain of communication the ability to act as a clearinghouse to make sure it all flows appropriately.
Can I pose something that happened, tell something that happened to me, and something that was a difficult thing to work through, is that when each director swears or affirms the oath of office, they're making an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state. There is nothing in the oath that says that they will honor, respect, and follow the policies and governance of these policies of the board that are imposed upon us by prior boards. So, well, did anybody else hear that?
But however it is,
So anyway, okay, go ahead, Sue, I'm sorry. So I've already laid it.
sorry, however it is, state statutes, our laws, and we sort of uphold those all supersede our policies, but as a home run community or a home rule community, we set our rules at our level.
Right.
Yeah, you own the policy, you change them if you want, it's fine. Right. But you're subject to them because you own them.
Well, that was just a difficulty that I ran into, is that these policies are imposed on us by a former board, and that.
But you are empowered to change them.
We have, I don't know that you that'd be factually be correct, right? But there should be a common agreement amongst this board that these are policies are followed, and if not, then change them, right? Don't feel like, oh, that board 10 years ago adopted this policy, now we're sort of forced.
Well, that's irrelevant. That's irrelevant because if we're following those, then we agreed to follow those, right?
Well, that was my assumption, that, yes, that was my assumption, but I'm just relaying a difficult situation that I faced.
Well, I'm hoping meetings like this are our opportunity to, if we don't like something, to discuss it and then adjust it in the future so that we are all able to adhere to these policies.
This is like our Constitution. If a board member does not like the policy, it's the same thing as if you want to change the law, then you go to the legislature and you try to change it out of the legislature. It's the same, it's constitutional by our law.
Right. And I just want to, I agree with you. I agree.
You should bring up some examples of some, for the next agenda stuff.
Oh, I can do something. Do you want them now or private?
I can't hear what you said.
I said you should break down his board policies instead of the president or the board agenda setting meeting, that way you would have a specific one.
For changes in consistent.
Well, I'm not suggesting any changes at this point.
Understood.
I'm just telling you a difficult situation that I experienced.
But to be clear on process, you own it, you can change it, to be clear on process. You can change any board governance policy. The correct way to do that is to ask the president to put it on the agenda for an upcoming meeting. And then you discuss it. And then you either agree on edits or you vote no on those edits. And then you move forward as a body, confirming that policy again or changing that policy.
I agree.
We've got a section on that too.
I'm sorry.
You're good.
You told us not to read ahead, so
Okay, so slide 13. So we talked a lot about the board's sort of role and responsibility in this policy governance relationship. I wanted to make sure we at least had one slide where we also talk about superintendent's expectations, right? Because he is a key component in a healthy policy governance system. So I talked about these executive expectation policies. Like I said, I think there's 13 of them. I didn't you don't want to copy and paste all of it in there, but I kind of went through and just highlighted a few that I thought at a high level were a good representation, I guess, of what is in those expectations. So the very first one, as we talked about throughout the day, right, like our main purpose above all is the superintendent's obligation to ensure students are prepared academically at each level to become productive, responsible, and successful citizens. That's directly in line with the purpose. Superintendent shall not cause or allow any practice, activity, decision, or district circumstance which is either unlawful, unethical, or imprudent, right? Obviously, we don't want superintendent to break the law.
Well, improvement is up to interpretation, isn't it?
Yes,
It is, yeah.
That's really open-ended vague. And
that's the
And
worst.
maybe
the
that's a
worst.
policy we look at then.
Boy, it was.
I thought this next one was interestingly worded too. Superintendent shall neither cause nor allow the development of fiscal jeopardy or a material deviation of actual expenditure from board priorities. We haven't talked a lot about this today, but I think this is important as well when we think about board role and responsibility. Fiscal solvency, fiscal responsibility, adopting a budget that is prudent. Go back to the word. We haven't talked a lot about this today, but that this is a super important board responsibility as well, right? Obviously, you cannot meet your purpose if you're financially in peril or in jeopardy, to use the term from policy. And then the Board of Education supports, encourages, and calls for the superintendent to practice the executive skills and contribute to an organization of excellence. So support, encourage, and call, or you can sub in the word expect the superintendent to practice executive skills, create an organization of excellence. And then lastly, so with respect to providing information and counsel to the board, superintendent models such communications while informing the board, fully disclosing accurate information. So accurate information piece.
You got any thoughts on that, Kim?
No, I appreciate you. You're right, there are a couple of those words that cause a little bit of problem. So after we do the superintendent evaluation, I might suggest that you consider meeting to bring any changes you want to make. Improvements in the word. And the other difficult one is,
Excellence.
oh no, cause or allow the development of fiscal jeopardy. In the end, the board approves the budget, so we provide all the information we can, but I can't tell you you're wrong at the end of the day. You have to make a final decision. So if fiscal jeopardy were chosen by your vote, I'm not able to fulfill that necessarily. So I just want to be clear that we need to fully express the budget and that ultimate authority lies with the board, but development authority lies.
So, we can't blame you for fiscal jeopardy?
No, right, absolutely can, right?
If it's
For misinformation,
No,
or a budget that, or
But I think
once you
if
agree on the
we
budget, no.
change it to present a budget, that doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly, that's, the intent is
Yeah.
right, I'm not just pointing out the two slight difficulties in wording that we will address.
Absolutely, that was a big one.
Yeah. And the way it's worded too is that so superintendent shall not cause. So if it's caused by the board, the fiscal jeopardy is caused by the board, it wouldn't necessarily be you by it. It's just saying that.
Fair enough.
All right, slide 14. This is going to be more a question or pause. So what are the expectations for communicating and working together with the board? What expectations do you guys have?
You know, the laws that we have to follow, it's difficult to communicate, and, it is what it is. But we need to adhere to those policies, and we've been talking about some of them here this morning, as to how we can communicate and keep all parties informed. So it's a challenge, it's something we always need to be working on. Comments?
going through that channel of the superintendent, right? He can send messages to all of us, and so that should be happening. Right, there should never be just discussions with the superintendent and one board member or two board members. Like if he's communicating with a board member, it should be with all board members. And the same thing, right, if we have a question or something we want to let all of the board know, we can copy the superintendent or ask the superintendent to send that information to everybody. So there is ways where we can still do that, still communicate in a public way. Emails are a great way to do it because then they are public records, so you're not skirting sunshine laws there. Again, making sure that we're doing that in a public setting.
And when we did just talk about that, does everyone understand? He can put it pretty well.
Yeah, but at the same time, I can meet with, or any two board members can meet together and discuss. And usually when I have those conversations, I make sure that the president knows, and that, hey, I met with Sue, and we had coffee, and we talked about this and that, and this and that.
But no decisions are being made.
Oh, you can't make a decision unless the entire board meets together. And it's good to see what each other think about things. And I like being able to do that. It's just that you have to be careful that I don't say, we're trying to come, if we're trying to do something, that I don't go talk to Keegan, and then Keegan goes and talks to Sue, and Sue talks, that's what kind of like daisy chain, yeah, and that's what I'm allowed to do, so.
Right. And I don't know if you feel like Cascade, right? Like we have all the other events that aren't board related, right? Like, sometimes community members are like, they were at,
Yeah, social.
some community event.
Yeah, kid birthday party.
Right, yeah, and like that is allowed as long as you're not
Discussing
public.
Well, we educate people on that.
We did,
Because we have gotten a lot of scrutiny from going to a football game, or going to this event, or walking out of a school together to a parking lot, which caused a lawsuit, so we need to educate the public as well.
We do, but I think part two to that is ensuring that the public hears all the conversation, right? So it goes back to that healthy board. If there's always a unanimous vote, and then you're seeing a public events outside of school board meetings together, there's going to be an assumption. So a good way to prevent that and allow us to actually interact with the public and run into each other at football games is to make sure that we are having these types of conversations at the board meetings, that it doesn't seem like you came to a board meeting with an answer already in hand. Right, those are the two parts that
So
go
are you saying that if we go to a public event, we need to say, the three of us went to a public event, there was a board meeting, and just, and openly put that out to the public at the next board meeting?
we could, but what I meant was when we're making decisions, that if there is a discussion, it will seem less likely that those discussions happen outside of board meetings.
And that's one of the points where I think that I failed when I was president, is not encouraging more conversation when we're doing things, so that the public could hear what each person was thinking. And I think that I could have done that much, much better, because the appearance is, even though we're very like-minded in a lot of things, and I think that that just has happened naturally. The discussion was an important part that I should have pushed for.
If I may just slip a word in, and it's only really clear, I heard something that I neither agree with nor conform to, so I have to call it out. The board needs to tell me what she wants. I heard Ms. Barkley say that the superintendent should not meet with board members individually. Not only do I not agree with that, but I even practice it. I absolutely meet with board members to sit down and understand your thoughts and your ideas. I go to dinner with you, whatever. And we'll continue to do that unless and until the board tells me you can't speak to this individual.
And we're in decision making. I didn't mean in the social.
We don't make decisions, but we absolutely maintain healthy dialogue.
Right, and I think we know what the sunshine law requires, and we know we can't always know what the public's going to interpret it as, but I think if we follow our rules and we're ethical, I don't think we owe an explanation. We're not breaking any laws, we're doing jobs. And I don't think we need to identify our colleges for all that.
It's a small community, so you're gonna show up at the same event, like sometimes they do, and they don't understand it. I mean, even when board policies, even when the public meeting was just mentioned and we were all gathering, it was because there was an officer in one building and we were there waiting to go to our car. So, you know, it was perceived very differently and I was not happy. And the public was already noticed that we were all going to be there, but there was nothing happening but just wanting to get to our car safely.
Right, and I think that goes back to having so many meetings or so many votes were unanimous and there was zero discussion, so that people make assumptions, right? I think that's why you need to have discussions, that's why it's important whether you agree with it or not. Speaking why you're making a decision is important for our communication.
Absolutely.
Mr. Foreman, I have a question for you.
Okay.
I'll give an example of, there was recently a class on Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay.
So 2 of us board members went. I wish our whole board could have sat and attended that.
Yeah.
What, I mean, can 3 of us, pardon?
We can arrange it, you can call a meeting.
Right, it's what a lot of boards do during the CASB conference, right? They'll post notice, the public's invited.
I mean, I get it.
If they want to be bored, they can come.
Which we've been doing even with like events, so if you were going to be at the Kiwanis event at the WPSD grapes, we usually let the president know if there's more of us going, we'll just, you know, I think I've talked to Kelly Beaver about it, and she's like, are you going, are you attending this, we're gonna post it. And it's just a community event that way the public knows.
It's erring on the side of caution. I think it's arguable whether or not, exactly what you just described, right, we're all going over Robert's Rules of Order, whether or not that's a discussion of public business is open to interpretation. There's at least one court case I'm aware of that would say that that's likely not discussion of public business. But if you were asking me, I would say post it.
How about this one? Because this happens all the time. When 4 of us, and it used to be 5 of us, would show up at the Republican Central Committee monthly meeting, and each elected person is giving a report of, you know, what's going on, what they've been doing, what they've been up to. Is that something that needs to be announced? Because the commissioners, there's 3 of them sitting right together, and they're not allowed to do that either.
It sounds like that would possibly be more on the side of the social function exception. If you don't post it, my advice to you would be don't talk about public business. If you think you're going to talk about public business, I would say post it.
Well, that's what it's all about, talking about public business.
Yeah, it's very good point. I mean, in the comment section, all elected officials have an opportunity to speak. Well, people want to know what's going on. There's no decision being made.
Are you
information?
Are you projecting public business, or are you discussing public business? Is it one person standing in front of an audience saying, here's what we've been up to? I would say that's probably not discussing public business, right? It's saying we can push information out via email, but we can't reply all and discuss it. I mean, we're really kind of
No, but I think it's an important thing.
Yeah.
When I'm there, I won't sit near any of the other directors, because I don't want the appearance of, hey,
that's good.
we're
That's
colluding.
good. You're on the side of caution.
Thank you.
Interestingly, there's no bad answers, just bad questions. You guys took that a totally different direction. So I'm going to re-ask the question. I should ask it this way. What are the expectations? We're going to assume the communication is a legal communication, right? We're not going to worry about open meetings law. We're not going to worry about Cora. We're going to assume this is, whether it's at a public meeting, it's in a legally allowed meeting, whatever. What are the expectations that you all have for one another for communication? Both for yourselves and for others. What are the expectations for this communication?
Well, I think we covered that prior to going off on the rabbit.
So how do you all want to be treated? How do you all, hold yourself accountable to treat others? That's kind of what I'm trying to get at.
I think we all need to be sensitive. I mean, there are different occasions since I've been on and was not on board of people frustrated saying, you know, I haven't been in the loop on this, or this caught me by surprise. We need to be sensitive to that and make sure that that one of our fellow directors is not feeling like that. We need to, that's been an effort to do this. And, you know, when that has happened, I mean, you know, it's gonna happen, and, you know, when it's brought to my attention, I feel bad about it. So I've got to work harder on making sure that I'm communicating what I have to the full board. And we have channels to do that. I need to follow the proper channels. Yes, so, you know, I think that's noted, well noted. And any other comments on that?
I would say that it really is important to pay attention once the budget study meeting has occurred, the issue has been sent out, to pay close attention to, oh, we're going to be talking about these things early on, like in case of clarification,
Yes.
But about what was intended there. That helps a lot too, if it's already done.
Yeah, I think that it's important that that agenda continues to be sent out promptly after you guys have set the agenda, so we can make additions, request subtractions, whatever.
At
It
least
should be
a
timed.
week. A week ahead of time would be,
It's usually.
A minimum.
Yeah, I think that's what's.
There was rare occasion it wasn't a week, but Kelly's very good about getting that out.
We try to like-
Pay out.
yeah, but we can adjust school, this kind of goes on, a little bit too, but, adjust the board meetings, like if there's a board meeting, just because of the time of the month, that butts up to an extended school break, where we're not gonna have the support staff to help us get that information out, it might be a good idea to move that board meeting. And we can look at the calendar ahead of time, like we want to do it on the spot, or we set a calendar for the year. We can say, oh, look, we have a school break, let's change that so we don't run into a situation where we're sending out the board back the day before the meeting.
Wasn't it snow? Wasn't it snow or was it?
It was a holiday and then 2 PD days and people weren't back. That's not normal. It would have been rude to move that board meeting.
Yeah.
I think Kelly does a very good job getting all information out as it's provided.
But we do, the rule is we make certain that the agenda goes out, the full copy goes out with at least an intervening weekend, because weekend is often with directors, the time.
And then we are saying within the law, what is the law, 48 hours?
Yeah, we try to do it as a natural.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is we're being lawful, and sometimes things happen, we have to adapt to it.
Certainly, but we can restrict it and do our best.
And then you have the community saying, this is, 6 months ago, I set this date aside.
It's more important for us to have the information ahead of time, and so, and again, you're not saying, hey, the board meeting next month, we're changing it because of this. It's at the beginning of the school year, hey, we have this break, it's falling on our normal cadence of a board meeting, so we're shifting it. And as well, the parents are not surprising. We know the dates, we know when our breaks are, we know them for next year already, we can set the board meetings.
And the board meetings are already scheduled. The regular board meetings are already scheduled.
Yeah, but we know that, that's the opportunity.
Okay, so we're on money there.
Now we're talking about one incident.
This is good.
Well, true, we never did that exercise, now we have an example, we'll take a look at that in the future. Thank you.
Trying to think whether, the community's input provide for us as a board member since the day one on this board.
I think, but as long as you give people enough lead time, they tend to understand why.
Understood. Everybody good?
Mr. Barnes?
Okay. So you guys have a policy that answers the question. GP4. I love number 1. Right? You guys literally put it at the top. It's your purpose statement. It's all this thing. Board members shall, number 1, the needs of children first. Right? And then as you go through, I'm not going to read all 18, but some of the things that jump out to me, things like honesty, respect, focusing on issues, shared goals, trust, timing. I think that was, you guys were just talking about, right? Communicate in a timely manner. Openly support majority decisions of the board. Seek first to understand and be understood, follow the chain of command, communication, talk about that. Are you guys ever going to disagree? No. Of course. Guess what? Your policy addresses that too. In times of disagreement, first attempt a resolution one-on-one. That doesn't work, involve a third-party facilitator. If that doesn't work, attempt to resolve it before board. Use executive sessions appropriately and judiciously, maintain confidentiality, disclose information and knowledge, share personal concerns, issues, without reproach. Okay, I think that goes back to focus on the issues, right? Like, don't engage in ad hominem attacks, which means if I disagree with you, I'm going to attack your position and not you as an individual, right? I'm not going to name call, I'm not going to, reproach you or, any of those types of things. I can attack your idea without attacking you. Assume a non-defensive posture. Take the initiative to communicate, ask questions, get one voice in there again. Protect the integrity, promote the positive image of the district and one another. Devote sufficient time to the job and be open and flexible. I think these are all really good.
Let me comment on a couple, please. Everyone around this table is going to experience a challenge with this, but we need to openly support majority decisions of the board. And we do that publicly, but then, there's frustrations because the majority didn't vote for it. And there's not a specific example, but we need to support majority decisions openly and stick to that. And then that also applies, number 15 says the same thing. Give direction as a whole board after discussion and agreement for one voice as a board. That builds on our strength and our purpose and our seriousness about what we're trying to accomplish here. This is about our children. I think those are two things that, that one would highlight. I think it's important for each of us to go over GP4 occasionally. The whole pack as far as that goes, but, to sit down and do this once a year, I don't have a memory to commit this all to memory, so I think we need to revisit these policies regularly. What that is for each person, I don't know. But once a year to go over these, a lot is nice.
Yeah, and here's how I respond to it generally, and even what Mr. Russell was talking about earlier with regard to one voice. There are two types of boards. There are functional boards and there are dysfunctional boards. Okay? Really? And you can kind of apply this in your relationship. You can think of marital relationships, you can think of family relationships, you can think of workplace relationships, right? There's functional and there's dysfunctional. Now, dysfunctional means that you always agree. Of course, right? Anybody's had a disagreement with a spouse or a family member. You can do that functional. You can also do it dysfunctional. Doesn't mean that you guys have to always agree, but you guys are committing to that disagreement being preserving the functionalness of the board. Because if you become dysfunctional, who suffers? Because number one, right? We always put the students first, the children first, right? It's a commitment. Not that we're always going to agree, but that if we disagree, we're going to do it in a functional way. How do we do that? I think this lays out some pretty good commitments that you all can make to disagree function. Okay. So I pulled in some other, it's kind of all in the same vein. So in order, so what are the expectations for communicating, working together as a board? Again, from policy, in order to build efficient, effective relationships, board members will establish a system of communication that builds on mutual expectations of trust, utilize positive communication practices. If a board member interprets this message or actions of another board member as verging on violation of board policy, what does that board member do? Should immediately bring up the concern in a positive, constructive manner, right? And the line what we were just talking about. which allows further discussion and clarification of policy. And then confidentiality. I actually did have a place where we were talking about open meetings, so I touched on it already. I'm happy to sort of continue with that. If you guys have any other questions about open meetings as well. It sounds like this is a fair degree of experience with it. Yeah.
Because then we had one concern to speak to the legal obligations under executive session and non-disclosure. Is that somewhere else in here, or is it?
Not really.
I think you should speak to it, sir.
Okay, executive sessions. Yeah, so executive sessions are a permissible way for the board, the entire board, to have conversations outside of the view of public. Now, why might we want to do that from time to time? There are conversations that a board needs to have that if it had them in public, it would be disadvantaged as an organization. I mean, some common ones. I mean, attorney-client privilege communications, right? Like if you are a defendant in a lawsuit and the plaintiff is sitting in the audience and you have to discuss your legal strategy in front of your plaintiff, you're going to be disadvantaged in that ongoing lawsuit. Contract negotiations, right? If you're constructing a facility and you want to go and you want to talk about the maximum amount you're willing to spend, and the contractor happens to be sitting in the audience and you say, our first offer is going to be $3 million, but we're willing to go up to $4 million, right? So these are the types of conversations that we want to be able to have in executive session. Other ones are things like student issues that are going to be FERPA protected, personnel issues that are going to be sensitive in nature, and you want to be able to talk freely about certain personnel without having to feel guarded because the public's in the room or prospective employers are in the room. We don't want to create a lawsuit for ourselves in the future. So those are some of the types of topics. You can't go into executive session for any reason you want to, right? It has to fit within one of the statutory categories. You have to announce that statutory category. You have to include a little detail about the purpose of the executive session. Anything else? Last piece. You also have a fiduciary duty to the organization to maintain confidentiality for anything that is discussed therein. So if you were to disclose confidential information, that could be a breach of your fiduciary duty to the organization if it causes harm to the organization, right? So to use that example, if you went out to the contractor and said, hey, it's your buddy or something, you're like, hey, just so you know, we're going to pay this $3 million as well to $4 million, right? And it somehow came out that you did that, right? You'd be in breach of your fiduciary duty. And that's just one example, right? Or anything that you might disclose that causes harm back to the organization. Besides that, the balance of the people. So. Anything else? Open meetings, executive sessions, board communication. We're going to shift gears again here.
Oh, is that?
We're going to shift gears again. Yeah. We're going to move on to talking about board meetings. 2 questions. So we'll start with just the first one. What is the purpose of board meetings?
To conduct board business in public.
Keep the public informed on how and why things are changing or going.
I mean, that is the one time that we can communicate this to the public as a group.
Yeah, public.
And we also have just mentioned the public seating portion, which is a great place for us to get feedback. How are we doing? How does the public perceive we are doing? And then make adjustments.
That's not, I think that's a requirement,
It's not.
but a good practice.
It's a
It's a good practice.
And we have been doing it, so that's why I called it out.
You guys hit on a lot of them. Okay, so before we turn to the policies, you guys also define the purpose of your board meetings. I thought it'd be good to just quickly discuss, does everybody know that there's a regular meeting, a special meeting, a work session, and a retreat? So we're at a retreat. Work sessions are generally like, there's some larger school districts, maybe some smaller ones, I'm not sure, that actually have like standing work sessions they have 2 meetings a month, right? They have a work session, and then they have a regular business meeting. I mean, do you guys do that?
You did at one point, didn't you have?
Usually larger districts do it, smaller districts tend not to, but, anyway, so you can have just a work session where it's like, all we're gonna do is discuss. We're not gonna vote, we're not gonna take any action, we're literally just gonna do discussion, get presentations, and things like that, and that's your work session, and then a business meeting where you're actually like voting on things and stuff like that. You can combine the two, they don't necessarily have to be 2 different meetings. And then, so you have your regular meetings, which is your sort of calendared out monthly meetings, it's always on the, whatever, second Wednesday, I don't know what yours is, but whatever. And then you can call special meetings, which is like when things come up, it's like we don't want to wait till the next meeting, or maybe there's just a lot going on at that meeting, we want to break it into, you can call special meetings. All right, so what's the purpose of a board meeting? Well, you guys kind of said it, so the board to accomplish its job. Board meetings are business meetings where elected representatives conduct business in the district. It's an opportunity where issues in need which require action, planning, brainstorming, thoughtful discussion without action, obtaining input, including consultation with selected groups and persons, and input from the public. It's an opportunity to get education, that might be what we didn't hit on. So like trans, how we're going to get education on things. It's an opportunity for ongoing review, modifying and refining the board purpose statement. Which we did a little bit discussing that today. That's all stuff that's on the table for board meetings. Then review the board superintendent relationship and executive expectation policies. Next question: what makes an effective board meeting?
Getting down to business.
Okay.
Lively discussion.
Okay.
Sticking to the agenda.
Also, yeah.
And quality communication, because it's you have once a month opportunity for this to be expressed well.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, the first thing I had there, which obviously legally required to do this, if you weren't, I would recommend it. So you gotta have an agenda, right? What are we going to be talking about? I did pull from GPA. I think I talked about this a little bit already. Just to go back over it. So how does the agenda get created? Well, according to policy, the agenda for the board meeting is prepared by the board president and superintendent in an agenda setting meeting at least 1 week prior to the board meeting. The board member wishes to include a topic on the board agenda. The topic is brought to the board president at least 24 hours prior, not to the board meeting, 24 hours prior to the agenda setting meeting, if possible. No later than 48 hours prior to the actual meeting.
Just to point to that, would it be possible for you to even make dates or this room and email informing the board members when that setting, the agenda setting meeting will be?
Do you guys have that as a standing for you guys?
It is primarily standing, because it gets moved once in a while.
Okay.
So, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Because you need to know how soon you need to reach out to them.
Yeah.
It would be nice to have a policy in place of when that proposed agenda, that it comes out as a draft agenda, that each board member has an opportunity, so we know if you're having a board meeting on the first Wednesday, or whatever the day is going to be, that it wasn't an unspoken custom of what we were doing prior, and I liked that custom, but it was not policy. That you have the meeting, set the agenda, if it's a draft agenda at first, all the board members have an opportunity to review it and have input, just like what I said earlier today, and then, if necessary, have another meeting, but the president is responsible for the agenda. But it would be nice to continue having that.
It's a rare occasion, we just had that in this planning session, there was some discussion there, some potential changes. So I don't know that, Kelly's very good about getting that out. But if there's an adjustment or something that takes place, it might be a day or two before that goes out. But I think generally that is an unwritten good policy.
You can do it.
Because the last meeting, just to throw that out there, the last meeting where we had an issue was didn't get the agenda until the day of the meeting. Or the day before, right at the beginning of the meeting, I mean, 24 hours before the meeting is when I got it. But it wasn't, so, I would like that not to happen.
So, I understand your point. I'll do whatever you want to do. You guys, but I want to be clear on the process here, because I appreciate these kind of special circumstances. In the board meeting, a special meeting is called for 1 week later. Right? Then that agenda goes out in case the day to get it out, and of course that's only a couple of days before the meeting. And then there's some jockeying on legal language. So that might happen once in a while for a special meeting, but for a regular meeting, we have an agenda setting meeting, I think it's usually 1 week after the last meeting. Right. And then we take 2 or 3 days to get it straight and make sure that we agree that it's what was said, and then it goes out to the board and you have a week and a half to 2 weeks.
That's wonderful. I want
That is an absolute practice.
Good.
That's the way. Sorry. I was just gonna say, I think it just gives us a little time to maybe catch any mistakes. So that as a board, right, we're putting our best foot forward, so we send it out to us in advance, so we go, oh, we forgot something that needs to be on there.
Absolutely.
It gives us the time to call that out, so we don't have to do it formally at the meeting, which can be sometimes embarrassing. We don't want to do that.
Agreed.
Slide 21, agenda contents. This isn't necessarily restricted. This is just typically things you might know. Following the roll call, adopt the agenda, public comment, approve any consent agenda items, look at reports from the superintendent or from whoever else is reporting, discussing the new business, discussion items. If you need to go into executive session to discuss something that's a potential action item. Action items. One thing I actually meant to put in here and didn't, but I note to myself, board reports. And then discussing it, and then just extend the intro out there. Yeah. So the one thing I'll say about board reports is it's supposed to be an opportunity for the board members to make a report, right? I went to such and such middle school for their Red Ribbon Day, and it was fantastic. It's supposed to be that kind of stuff. I attended the football game on Friday night. It was awesome. We won. It's like that kind of opportunity. It's generally not supposed to be an opportunity to just, I can talk about whatever I want. So just be mindful of that. Particularly like public business-y type stuff, right? Because we need to notice that in the agenda ahead of time. But anyway, any thoughts or questions about agenda contents?
I had one more point, and you're the attorney, so put it back here if it's wrong in the way. It's also important to report reports since they come out at the end, and the agenda has already been discussed, but that board report not become an extension of the agenda item that was already.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not.
Those issues have already been handled by the time we get to it.
Yeah, it's really not supposed to be kind of free for all. I guess in my 5 minutes.
Is there a legal restriction on that? Like, if I want to talk about something that I'm concerned about an agenda item, and I wanted to continue something that I was saying, am I permitted to do that, or am I violating statute?
I wouldn't say you're violating a statute. I'd say it's more of violating.
It's a good practice.
You're a problem.
Yeah, it's like a board.
You close that agenda item.
Yeah.
And this is per Robert's rules of order, this laid out.
Honestly, that's just really not what the board report is for.
Okay.
The board report is supposed to be reporting out, right? And it certainly shouldn't be like a discussion either, right? Like it shouldn't be like you talking and somebody else talks about that same thing. It's just reporting out. Here's,
Could it be a good place to, like, a lot of us are representing a specific school or an area, where you could call out like, hey, like I'm over Columbine, and say like, hey, these things are happening at Columbine, here's some issues that we may want to discuss in the future that are affecting that particular school, because each school can be a little different, right, in their needs. Would that be appropriate, or would you say?
I don't have any immediate objection to that, or I guess part of it is like what exactly are we talking about? Like if it's,
Yeah. Just like, since we do kind of our districts, and some of us are.
I think that would be fine.
Some do specific schools, and we're good with that school to just call out that.
Yeah, no, I think that would be fine, and maybe another similar example is if you sit on a committee, right? Like a lot of times in board reports, like, hey, I went to the DAC meeting last week, here's what we talked about,
Yeah.
right? That kind of
Right.
I mean, along those lines, Keegan, you're giving your report, you're talking about something positive that took place in Columbine. You saw something there that you thought, we can tweak this. So you say, this is my report, this is an excellent activity, and something we might consider in the future is this, and leave it there, then you do get that, or you do get it put on people's minds.
I just wanted to see if that was within the confines of what that is, and if the board was okay with that, and it's a good way to outreach the schools.
We've had some issues like that before, where like if there was something going on at a specific school or the sidewalk incident, the board reports bringing that out, and then the next agenda, it would be like.
That's a good example. It's just not something for us to start another discussion during the meeting.
Discussion.
Yeah, so we bringing it up as like a statement and then.
that's a good thing. That's kind of right.
Because if not, it can probably go into the discussion part, how we were like continuing in our last meeting, and not to try to like stop that and have just a board report statement, but bringing it up to possibly discuss it, or have like an informative session, or letting the president know to that on a future agenda would probably be. Anyone?
So moving on to slide 22, some of this stuff is just kind of basic, but just kind of go over it, right? So, again, what does an effective board meeting look like? So for adopting motions, there should be a motion, second discussion, and roll call vote. You guys have that one. This next part is about, so if you do want to change the policy, that's come up throughout the morning, and we do that on a proposed change of policy. So how do we do that? That's what this process lines up. So you all have adopted a first read, second read policy, right? So like we don't propose and adopt policy change all in the same meeting. So it's brought forward for discussion. The meeting goes to the board president. If you want to get a policy change, you work with the board president, you can get that on a future agenda. It goes to a first reading, we just discuss it. Right? We just discuss it. There might be some, hey, instead of worded this way, maybe worded this way. There's a consensus around that. Yeah, let's bring back a version that looks like that at the next meeting. So that's your first reading. And then the next board meeting, or a subsequent board meeting, you have a second reading, which would be, okay, now this thing should be pretty close to a final draft, and we can make some changes if we want to. And then we're going to vote to approve it at that second reading. The policy does allow you to waive that. Sometimes there could be reasons why you want to. Usually like an emergency, or sometimes there's like statutory changes where it's like, we have to make this change to this policy. You can do it all in one meeting if necessary.
And the policies, they're not legal policies, right? So we wouldn't necessarily need legal counsel to construct the policy, or should we? Shouldn't.
I'm biased. I was going to say, I'm going to say yes, right? And yeah, I do both.
Okay.
Yeah, so you guys are bringing up something in a policy discussion. I'll try and capture it,
Yeah.
but then I'll send it to attorneys and say, this is right, so
Yeah.
you bring it to it. So when we come back to the red line, we guys can do it, we at least know that the attorney's not going to say, I think there's a problem with that statement.
Right, but yeah, right.
So
We
we
don't
try to
want
do
to anyone.
Yeah, it's never a bad idea.
Policy.
But it's never a bad idea. But at the same time, if it's like we're going to rewrite, GPA, instead of saying the needs of children first, we're going to put the need of students first, right? You need legal review for that.
Yeah, but aren't there certain policies that in statutes and laws that we'll have to abide by, or like writing, and we'll want to like work with my solution?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, there's certain policies that I think would be really remiss if we didn't get it for sure.
And we're sensitive to that, and so is the superintendent. I mean, if this is something that grows legs, it's obviously we would want to invite the attorney, and there's a rare occasion that will, there'll be something on the agenda that will invite the attorney, so.
Sure.
We're sensitive to that.
I'm also shaking his head, I'm sure, I was just curious, you were shaking, is it because you work with policy analysis and you're talking about some of your background, and do you see that with like the legislator or the CED and things that come down?
Yeah, so what you'll see pretty often is that there are policies that are completely at the discretion of the board, right, which is kind of what Tim was talking about. That's probably the most. Then there are policies the legislature requires you to adopt, right? And one of the favorite tricks the legislature has had in recent years is that it loves to legislate on that issue, right? And then pass down something that is always ambiguously enough worded to be irritating, and to be sure that you don't exactly know whether or not you're doing it right. Those, the policies themselves aren't statutory, but they come from statutory mandates that they exist. Those are good examples of things that you would definitely want to legislate to take a look and make sure you compliance.
And I would add that when we're legislative action that requires a policy or a policy change, it calls out that the district must have something like this. We get it from the attorneys. We ask for the recommended language that complies with the law first, and then we bring it to the table. And that does happen fairly routinely.
That's what I thought, that was my assumption, but, as, Mr. Farmer said, a perfect example is like putting children first or putting students, it's like, those are so arbitrary to what the legal, legislator will push down for.
And it's worth noting, not to get too stuck on this, but so earlier we talked a little bit about the sweeping powers that are granted to school boards. Particularly in Colorado, we have a local control clause in the Constitution, which has been really key to the point of doing almost everything the school district does. The legislature usually can't dictate directly to you that you do this, that, or the other. They can require you to adopt a policy in which you address it. So you have decided that you have some leeway in terms of how exactly it's crafted, but just be aware that that's a favorite play by our friends if ever something to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Announcement provisions were kind of curious.
That's what you was this
A
chair.
little bit of legal advice on the front end is going to say that the need for a lot of advice in the back.
And we need to resist tyranny wherever it's found.
All right.
You ask me first.
So we might be able to go over the last slide, which is where we're talking about some guiding principles, Robert's Rules of Order, and still in this. Still talking about effective board meetings. Robert's Rules of Order, as you see in front of you, is lengthy. Didn't want to spend, all of our time going through all of that, so I thought it would be good to. There we go. I thought it would be good to pull out some of the sort of guiding principles of Robert's Rules of Order, just to kind of talk through, build some mutual commitment to. Okay, so each board member has the right to participate in discussion, right? Everybody gets a turn to talk. Each person gets to speak once before anyone gets to speak a second time. That's kind of a general principle, right? If you don't have to speak, but you get an opportunity to speak if you want before somebody gets a second go at it. Only urgent matters may interrupt the speaker. Board member must be recognized by the board chair before speaking. I will say that this is one, as a person that, we've got over 90 clients in the state of Colorado, all over the board, go to a lot of board meetings. This is one that gets relaxed quite a bit. I see frequently relaxed. I don't necessarily recommend that, but just saying that it does happen.
Maintain order of the meeting of the chair.
I agree. Are you all committed that that's the way it should work, right? So,
I recently attended a meeting on Robert's Rules of Order, and technically, if a member wants to speak, they raise their hand, and then it's the chair's responsibility to say the chair recognizes the member. You don't typically use names as the member. So the chair recognizes the member, and that keeps people from one another on various things, because it's not unusual the two people start to speak at the same time. So that's technically how Robert's rules of order are. David, you want to say something, you raise your hand, the chair recognizes the member, and you speak, and it does keep order. And you can use those rules as you know, there's flexibility, but those were put together, there's reasons for each of them. I'm sorry, I didn't want to.
No, I wanted to talk about it for a minute, because, for example, we haven't done this today, right? Are there going to be certain meetings, maybe we don't do it work tonight, I'm not suggesting that, right? But like formal regular meetings or when business items are being discussed. Again, I'm just trying to get mutual sort of head nodding agreement that like this is the process we want to follow, and we're going to hold each other to that. And if we slip and somebody is like, you know, we're going to remind everybody we committed to this process. And sounds like the answer, but I just want to acknowledge that there might be some discussions where you guys also by consensus sort of agree that we're going to that.
I would suggest one here split, just because I do a lot of boards. On action items, this becomes more important. When you're going to take their votes, to go around and make sure everyone has a chance to speak once, and then to recognize and continue dialogue at the chair's discretion until it becomes your vote. And then to put it to a vote, the chair recognizing the speakers will go with the tendency to talk over one another and try and get an action item done.
I think as long as everybody's polite and they're not interrupting each other, I was much more informal, and I often was calling people by their first names, and I don't know if that was right or not, but it felt comfortable with me. But I agree, you can't, there's times for less formality and more formality, but that everybody has an opportunity to speak and that we're all polite to each other.
Something that I recognize, we can do our own hybrid, but I do think it important for each of us to, you know, attend this class, and I'd like to see each of us go through that, to have the baseline and to work from there. I think it's a good practice. And then we, you know, as you and Mr. Witt said, we do our own hybrid. I mean, I don't know if it actually happened, but I was hoping that the guidelines for board meetings was placed on the chairs at the last meeting, because that is a baseline that we will work from. And it's important that everyone understand the baseline, and you get a more cooperative meeting and a more cooperative group if everyone understands the baseline rules. And Robert's Rules of Order, the baseline rules for this.
And I might add, if you are ever interested in watching something that is a modified version of Robert's Rules in action, especially for committee work, Tim mentioned earlier, this is a legislative body, listen to the legislative committee hearing, and the way that they handle their business. It's not incredibly formal, they don't follow every piece of Robert's Rules, but they adhere to the parts that they have to get through controversial subjects with a lot of people in the room. You know, I won't say the
I
time.
think they should be a little more formal in that particular
Yeah,
case.
it depends on which committee, but I've always thought that was helpful to listen to them, because they tend to be the most consistent example of these things being applied in practice. It might be a good place to start.
Every one of those I've been at to testify, most of them sit there on their phones.
That's true. Well, I can't vouch for the individual behavior of the legislators. They may or may not be listening, but as far as the process of being recognized by the chair and the general discussion.
The chair recognizes the member.
Well, I just thought that it might be good, because I just witnessed, you know, director of schools and directors having set about to do that and talk. But what if there's certain members that have hearing aids or, you know, difficulties that we might need that? And I'm not trying to say that as a difficulty, but I can see where that practice is good, so we don't feel
Yes.
like we're, hurting.
And, you know, we're talking about the difference between a board meeting and a retreat, and there will be a notable difference. But Cassie's right. There are times that that's important to conduct ourselves that way. Thank you, Cassie. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, the chair recommends the chair.
Like, look at me as a meeting or speaking match, like,
Yeah.
it is prevented. We should all understand it to the best of our ability. There are some good shortcuts, and we were given that as well. But anyway, before this is all said and done, I went to this, I was very encouraged by it. Sue might be here, we had a family issue, and I would like to have more there. There would have been more than 2 there.
Well, maybe that's something that, how the work session or retreat to have something specifically for the order and discussing it in more detail.
Well, in this particular case, Mr. Carlson did it, and he presented it very well. And
I'm just curious how you found out that session was taking place.
it came out in an email. It had nothing to do with our operation. I mean, I get a lot of emails of various opportunities, so I don't know how that went out. I didn't have anything to do with that. But now, having been to it, I'm going to purpose to try to get the whole group involved in the future. Thank you, Evan.
I don't know how.
How do you punish the chair?
Huh?
How do you punish the chair? We're not following
I
Robert's.
was gonna say, any punch out for having served over the years as chair. Okay, so again, just sticking to some of the principles, and last one we talked about, what it's about, right? Only one board member should be speaking, i.e. at the floor at a time. Only one item should be discussed at a time, right? So it should be motion, second, discussion about that item, and that discussion is closed, and we move on to the next item. Each board member should be given up to the same amount of time, and you all speak for the exact same amount of time, but you should all have up to the same amount of time to speak as any other board member. So especially for items in which much discussion is anticipated, a total time limit can be agreed upon, like consensus and put in place by the chair. I've been to board meetings, school board meetings where like everything is timed, like they'll have a timer, so not suggesting you should do that. But it is an option. And particularly if you have things that you think are going to require a lot of discussion, by consensus agreeing, hey, we're going to devote 20 minutes to this or whatever it is. Okay, there's 5 of us, each get 4 minutes to speak, that kind of thing. You get to the end of the 20 minutes, you can, again, by consensus, keep going. Right? It's like we're going to check in at the end of 20 minutes, and if it's getting redundant, then there's kind of start to take some things over again, we're going to call the question. It's not about
something like that before, and we've held on like, okay, we're going to have this for 20 minutes, and then I think there's been previous discussions like a year or so ago about having a set timer so people could see everything. And I've sat on other boards where they have it, but we haven't necessarily implemented that.
Yeah.
We do try to keep on timely to respect not only our time, but the public time as well as our administrators and the staff as they're presenting that have been there all day, so.
Yes.
There used to be a I'm sorry.
No,
Sorry. Go, you go ahead.
I'm just gonna say, I think generally with this great job of discussing, during discussions that it doesn't get too repetitive, but that one does, that generally we can do them on anyway. Certainly if it gets to the point where we're not doing them naturally, we might want to look into setting rules, but I don't know that it's necessary until that becomes a problem.
There was a few, I remember meetings where I felt like we were just in a circular loop and we've got to stop it. But as long as you catch it and then try to get, usually the board president, brings it back together and something.
Yeah, a component of it as well is this notion of like trying to keep it equal. Because I've also seen situations where like one board member will take up 19, 20 minutes, and you know what I'm saying? Like, so there's an element of it too of like, hey, kind of all agree we're going to get 4 minutes. Doesn't mean that maybe we're free for more than that, but just trying to keep it equal. People speaking. It's genuinely not. I'm not suggesting that it should be a way to like stifle discussion or even stifle an individual board member that's dissenting or whatever. It's more about making sure that it's equal in time, and the discussion that is keep going on.
I think the chair has some discretion there, correct?
Well, I would say it's usually the majority rule in the sense if you got an end of 20 minutes, for example, and the majority was like we want to keep going, I would say that was you can do it by consensus if everybody's like, let's keep going, but if one person's like, no, I'm ready to call a question, and which actually called the question technically requires 2/3 of Robert's rules, which you guys are bound by. But yeah, I would say if the majority wants to be talking, then you should be talking.
Well, this seldom comes up. I mean, there's none of the consent committee commonly comes up. They have a little time. But we don't have a Leon or a Robert here, so we're really just fine.
Yeah, that's not fix the problem, it doesn't need to solve it. Okay, yeah, just minor procedural issues arising on the side by consensus. If one majority vote is needed, consensus can be reached. Okay. That's pretty much everything I have. Happy to, any questions or just
Yeah, and I'll throw in just one last point on Robert's rules, which is that a lot of it, even in the absence of formally adopting, it's just habit, right? So the more that you do it, obviously you'll have situations where you don't want to be super formal, retreats an example of that. The more that you do it as a habit and as a norm, the more easier it'll get, right? And it'll start to alleviate some of the need for parliamentarian, you can have arguments often about it. So almost like anything else, even if you're not going to formally adopt it, picking those several items that are big ticket items that are going to help things move procedurally along more smoothly. Doing that with consistency, you'll eventually get into a rhythm with it where it just becomes more or less second nature. I think a lot of that will be back into the effective communication part of the discussion here. So I'll throw that out there. Some of it's the formal piece of having to look and doing the training, which I think is great. Some of it is just deciding what you're comfortable with and getting the routine of doing that every single time until it becomes just the way to do things. Okay, we talked a little bit about the legislature earlier. I'm going to keep this one relatively short, but feel free to ask me questions as we go. I'm going to provide just a brief legislative update of where we are. Most of you likely know this already, but for those who don't, the legislature meets every year for 120 consecutive days. It starts in January. People like me spend the entire rest of the year dreading that day. And then it happens anyway, and we never stop it, unfortunately. And then it goes until early May. So we convene early January this year as required by the Constitution, expecting it to be a busy year, and it's turned into a very, very busy year. Last time I counted, there are in the neighborhood of 500 bills already floating around in the Capitol. You usually get to 800. That puts us well ahead of schedule, so I'm expecting we might break that good 40,000 bill number. A lot of those deal with education, right? So healthcare is the biggest issue that we're probably going to be looking at this year legislatively. Education is the second largest. A lot of the first crop of bills have already been introduced. Legislators only get 5 bill titles, so we get to have 5 bills just sort of in the pocket to introduce out of the gate. And then there's a deadline for introducing further bills, which would seem to provide you with some type of hope that there wouldn't be any further bills, but that's not how it works, right? So just as we were talking about the rules, leadership can waive those requirements, and then we start getting into late bills. So we passed that initial crop, those are all out there. Now we're starting to get into later bills, stuff that will be introduced outside of those deadlines, and those tend to be a little bit more interesting. They're talking about a lot of stuff down there. I'm going to break our discussion up into 4 basic buckets. The first one being governance. So since we ended there with Tim, we can start there again. This one, and the first one that I want to call up, if I can finally do one list.
Did you provide handouts that I'm missing or not?
I did not, I apologize.
Would you do it now?
Sure, yeah, I can put together some notes for you guys on this one. There are a lot of them I think it's really good.
So whichever one is here.
Can we take a bio break? I think there's a in the room.
Sure, yeah.
So let's do that before we get this last agenda.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So, yeah, and I'll keep this brief because like I said, that was the last thing between you all and lunch. So I'm just going to kind of pick up the big ticket items in these buckets as we go through. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I know you originally listed the bills that we talked about after the fact. I apologize, I don't have it for you. It's all buried in the software program. You probably got that same list. So, on the governance side, so going back to where we left off, I wanted to flag House Bill 1168.
HB 1169.
1168. And this bill is called Equal Access to Public Meetings. So just as we were talking about before, the legislature can't tell you what to do really in your public meetings, but they can tell you how to hold your public meetings. And this bill would require all state and local public bodies to provide a number of accommodations at every single board meeting. One would be live streaming the meetings in almost all cases. Another would be providing opportunities for virtual testimony or comment if you're going to allow testimony or comment. Obviously, that varies by the board or the body that's doing it. And then a number of basically accessibility aids for folks who may have hearing difficulties or other difficulties who may not be able to participate in the meeting. It's not specifically focused at school boards. I believe it actually is kind of a discussion around county commission meetings. However, it's all public bodies, right? State and local. So it would apply to school boards. It would apply to individual charter school boards. It would apply to effectively everybody. So that's one to keep an eye on. That one is up somewhat oddly in the House Transportation Committee. You would expect to see it go on the Transportation Committee. But the primary sponsor chairs that committee and probably just wants to have his baby home, so to speak. So it is up on March 5th at 1:30. So if you wanted an opportunity to listen to the legislative committee hearings, as I mentioned before, what better opportunity than one that happens to also be about how you guys get to conduct your business. But I want to flag that. Did you have a question?
I mean, so if this were to go through, schools would potentially have to buy supplemental hearing devices. So surely they're gonna have some money to go with that to pay for this, correct?
Not yet. So,
But that's what it would require ultimately, correct?
it could, yeah. I think, so there are a whole bunch of things in there to think about. One is obviously the accessibility aids and what you can do there in terms of reasonable accommodation. The other being how it affects the locations where you can hold board meetings, right? So for instance, if you're in a place that doesn't offer reliable internet, or for whatever reason doesn't offer you the technological support to do what this bill would require, that'd be something we would have to think about. And same thing with the technology that you bring with you, right? So you can have some way for folks to see you, to hear you, to know what you're doing in time. All of those are solvable problems, but there's stuff that will impact where and how you will use.
I feel like we covered a lot of this already. The one that I found interesting was the virtual comment. So would that mean if you were allowing public comment, you would be required to allow people who weren't in the meeting participants to sign up for public comment?
Correct.
Or not in the meeting?
Right, so
Zoom
which city council does currently, after the city council meetings, you can see the people's in their comments.
They allow,
So it's
more comment.
They do, yeah.
So it's 2020. It
Right,
really
that's
came
very
out, it
important.
really came out of COVID. We started seeing, our local government start doing that, and then we started hosting more virtual meetings, even those for school board, and then we also leave them up now, because prior to, this board, they weren't up after, so now you can be open whenever.
Right.
I have two questions in regard to that, if you're done.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the first question is, does that access apply to all board meetings? For instance, we're at a retreat that has, I've got LTE and 2 bars here. Does that apply to this meeting as well, live streaming, work retreats?
It would, any public meeting in which public business is discussed. So it's going to cover everybody.
Well, we discussing public business here. We're discussing the conduct of the board.
All right, so I'll defer your legal.
Yeah, I think the trickier one is going to be how to do this at CASB. Right? Those are this one is almost to me like, yeah, of course.
Would that be our responsibility or CASB's?
It was still.
Technically yours. It's arguable whether or not CASB is technically within the open meetings law.
Yeah.
But most districts assume that it is, or at least err on the side of caution. So I guess you're just going to be like walking around the live stream.
And go.
Yeah. That's the better question. I don't know. I'm sure it'll come up at some point in the making of this bill.
Did you say that this meeting would apply to those rules?
I would say yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the probability of passing, not?
Yeah. Yeah, very high.
So, two things here. One being, and we didn't talk about it today, I'm not suggesting we get into the conversation. One thing that you as a board can do is have opinions on legislation up to and including asking for changes, supporting, opposing, every one of you. Lots of school districts do that. It's not uncommon. It's perfectly legal. It's not a bad idea to think through some of these things. If you have something to say, especially if it's working its way through committee, there's always an opportunity to change it. Right? The way the bill is introduced is not necessarily the way the bill will be when it's passed. So with this one and with any other legislation, keep that in mind. Right? You as a board have the ability and the authority to decide whether or not you'd like to move in on any particular aspect of it.
I have a second question.
Sure.
On this bill. Accommodation for people attending in person. Is there any requirement to, if we think, our meeting hall accommodates what, 90 people or 100 people, somewhere around there. What if NBC shows up and 700 people want to come to the meeting? Is there any requirement for us to move the venue to accommodate the people who want to attend in person?
No, not explicitly. So as long as you're offering that virtual option, you would still be okay in that scenario. As long as those things get online.
I think this bill is actually in the direction of you get it on TV. Yeah. This bill is less in the direction of people being in a room. It's more in the direction of like creating virtual options.
And we do that,
So one final note on this one that's worth keeping in the back of your head is that if you don't do this, so let's say that you do fail to meet the requirements of this bill, then you would be found to be in violation of the anti-discrimination statute, which is a whole world of legal work that probably you don't want. So keep in mind that there's all the stuff, and then there's the teeth and the good stuff, and the teeth in this case are sharper points. So that's that. There's other stuff on governance, but let's just stick to that one. That's the big ticket item that came March 5th in House Transportation at 1:30. They can't reschedule anything anytime they want. I'm not in charge of that. They don't care what they think. So just as a heads up, it's not my fault that they changed it 10 minutes before they're supposed to have a meeting, but this is the item in the calendar for now.
Are they doing public testimony there, or is
They do. So every bill at the Capitol has to have a hearing, and they always have a testimony.
and testimony is on March 5th as well?
It would be.
Is there any benefit for the board taking up an official stance on it as a body sending it, or?
So I would defer to you all on that one. You would not be alone in having a position on it.
And if the bill passes, you can zoom your testimony.
So my first question
They'll listen to
You guys want to drive up there for, but
you can do Zoom. They do Zoom on the legislature.
it actually is more beneficial to go in person and just eat, because then you can even call them out for not listening to you as often.
That physical presence is a big challenge.
And it's always.
That's why our conversations like we can.
Okay, so that's kind of bucket one. There's one there, we're going to leave it there for now. Bucket two is on the, what I would consider sort of operational side of schools. There's a lot here, ranging from relatively minor issues like how you provide food menstrual products to students to how you engage in student discipline, how you engage in employee discipline, to bigger issues like school safety. So what your security officers have to do in order to qualify as security officers, the situations in which the security officers can be armed is a big one down there. There are two bills on this. Senate Bill 131 deals with carry in daytime sensitive spaces. That's one to pay attention to. K-12 schools have been carved out of that so far, but it still includes a reference to preschools. A lot of schools operate preschools on the same campus as their K-12 schools. So therefore, there is still a tie into that. And that is worth paying very close attention to, because depending on how your security officers are contracted and what the details of those are, there could need to be some changes made on that one. It's also worth noting that a draft version of that bill before it was introduced did include K-12 schools that didn't include since, but the legislature can do it as it pleases, and can always add them back in. So that is one that I pay attention to. The second school safety bill is House Bill 1310. This is a little bit more recent of a bill. This one very specifically governing the training requirements for security personnel. And the requirements under which they're allowed to be armed in schools, as well as everything from firearm storage in schools to psychological evaluations of security personnel and everything else. This one, again, I don't necessarily know whether this is the case, but there are a lot of districts and a lot of charter schools who have security plans that include armed staff. This bill would make some very dramatic changes to the ability for that to continue existing.
I was going to ask about how does this affect the FASTA program?
Yeah, so FASTA is pretty heavily involved in it. If it were to pass, as it has been introduced, you could make a pretty strong argument that it would effectively eliminate programs like that. In favor of needing to have professional security personnel who meet the requirements of it.
So this goes hand in hand with the bill about carrying in parks, churches,
So that's actually going to go in 31, that's the first one. They're not quite companion bills, but they're very close to it.
Now, if those pass, how much time do governing bodies have to implement that?
So I think on 1310, it would be the following school year, so we can talk about this kind of fall. 131, because it no longer includes schools, is sort of up in the air in terms of how that will affect it. We'd have to go back and check it. Yeah, preschools only. As well as, allowing us of other places that are necessary education review. But you can be pretty quick in the next school year too.
Both of these bills, wouldn't there be a high probability that the Second Amendment groups would be going after this?
Yeah, they definitely are, right? So whenever you're dealing with politics, you have a Venn diagram. How well you can build that Venn diagram is depends on the issue. When they're going to be involved, it tends to be pretty messy. But I will say that what legislators are probably hearing less of is the opinions of educators, right? And school boards and others who are in that space specifically, as opposed to more on the constitutional side of Second Amendment discussions and litigation around it. That will change as we get closer to committee hearings and as those bills start to move. But they're pretty big ticket items currently, ones that the board ought to be aware of.
Do those have dates for discussion?
Not yet. They will both be heard in March. I lied to you actually. I have under 131 for March 13th.
Oh, sorry, no.
That must have just happened yesterday.
Yeah, 1310 doesn't have one at all right now,
So Senate Bill 131?
Senate Bill 131 and House Bill 1310. And 131 will be March 13th at 1:30 in the Senate Judiciary Committee. I would expect there to delay on that. There's a lot of stuff going on. Also on the operational side, we have a number of things that start to wiggle into the realm of how school districts do things. One of those is Senate Bill 49, which would govern when and how you review and potentially remove library materials. Currently, most school boards have their own policy on how to do this. If they follow one way or the other, this would more or less replace those policies with state law. That includes the requirement for a district committee, made up of certain folks, who will sit down and review requests for things to be removed or revised, and then have to make a determination based on their proceedings as a committee. It also includes language buried down in it that directs the State Board of Education to adopt new rules and new standards that to some extent govern how and when school districts can adopt certain curricula, instructional materials, classroom materials, everything all the way down the line. Notable for two reasons. The first being, obviously, a lot of districts have a lot of interest in library materials and processes for that. It's been a pretty big issue over the last several years. The other being that later in the bill includes that reference that is not just library materials, but is this laundry list of almost everything you do in a school, and handing that to some extent to the State Board of Education, which is interesting for a number of reasons.
Wouldn't that violate the constitutional responsibilities and authority that the boards currently have?
I would think so, but.
Because that's expressly enumerated in our constitutional authority. They can't restrict that without a constitutional change.
Well, they can, and it's gotta be called on it.
Right. Well, we once again have to say this is tyranny.
So all be, online, they're all gonna be government employees.
Well,
maybe.
it's, so that's certainly a topic of conversation. The trick is that courts don't care about baby laws, they only care about real laws, and so until it is passed or in existence, there's not a lot that you can do with it other than try to convince legislators of your opinion on the matter. This one is particularly important because it is up in committee in 2 days, on Monday, February 26th, the Senate Education at 1:30. So if you want to listen to that one, it'll be up. I'm going to skip a lot of the other stuff because there's just a lot and you guys are hungry. But I'm happy to talk about it during lunch if you prefer or whatever. The last thing I'll talk about is school finance. We don't have the school finance act yet. We won't until March, at least. For those who don't follow the legislature, their process is that they have to have the long bill, which is the state budget bill where everybody gets their money. That has to be out and basically done in March so that we can go and do all the extra stuff like school finance and everything else. The legislature last year passed the School Finance Act that made a promise to fully fund school districts, which means to eliminate the budget stabilization factor, previously known as the negative factor, which has been there for almost as long as I've been doing this, and it remains several times. That number is somewhere around $300 million. A fair amount of their ability to do that was wrapped up with money related to Proposition HH, which did not pass on this last ballot cycle. So, where and if they find that money is an open question when it comes to the School Finance Act. But it's a pretty large chunk of money. Obviously, we trickle through Lincoln Park and every school district in the state, represent a fairly large increase in per pupil funding. The School Finance Act will be a very interesting bill to follow this year. It is every year, obviously, I don't always pay attention to it as that it is. This year in particular will be interesting because of that particular promise and then the various trade-offs it's going to take to keep that promise. Whether or not we get there is an open question. It's worth noting that the legislature can write promises in the law and they can just take them back later. They're not statutorily bound really to do this. They can just pass a School Finance Act that doesn't now include this money. So for folks who are paying attention to the finance side of the school conversation, it is worth being aware that that's coming up and potentially being aware of the fact that even though the headline is that they made the promise, you might still want to know if you're interested in it. And the last bucket that I'll cover real quickly is choice. This largely deals with charter schools. There are a couple of bills out there that are worth paying attention to that are not completely related, but close enough related that it's worth watching. The first is Senate Bill 88. Senate Bill 88 would add a whole bunch of new requirements for data reporting from charter schools and from school districts that would be included in a triennial report that the state publishes every 3 years about the performance and growth of charter schools in the state. It's a fairly lengthy bill. Most of the data points are designed to get a better picture of how charters are operating, how authorizers are interacting with their charter schools, how quickly they're growing, what transportation systems look like, trying to answer a lot of those questions that are related to public school choice. In and of itself, the bill is fairly innocuous because it's just dealing with reporting with a legislative data readout, more or less. However, because charters are a big ticket item, there's a lot in there. How data gets reported matters, how folks collect the data matters. And so Senate Bill 88 is a big one to be paying attention to in relevant charters. If for no other reason than it will require school districts to provide new data that you probably are not providing now to the state. Related to that, there's another bill that does not have any number still floating around out there. This one is going to be a House bill, likely from Representative Garcia, that would make a very, very large number of changes to the charter authorization practice. So everything from how and when school boards approve charter applications to circumstances under which they are allowed to not approve those applications, to what state board appeals look like, renewal cycles, facilities, if you can name a thing related to charter schools, it's probably in the draft. We haven't seen a new draft of that for at least 2 weeks now. It's under negotiation, as you can probably imagine. But I am expecting to see that probably introduced here potentially by the end of this month, definitely next month. The speaker has indicated that she would like to negotiate on this one, and she would like to talk about it rather than just saying that she'd rather not go there this year. So it will come out, and very quickly will become probably the largest education fight in the legislature as soon as it touches the ground. So as you're paying attention to all these other fun things, keep in mind that the main fireworks display is probably not quite ready yet. But when it comes out, obviously we'll have an impact on any district that has charter schools, which would include Little Park. So
Do you sense that this is some of the first steps, obvious steps in the elimination of control, state control, further control of charter schools? And how much is the National Education Association behind all of this legislation? In your thoughts?
Well, the second point again is that I would imagine the CEA, Colorado Education Association, will support the bill. So you have to work on that process behind the scenes. Nominally, the sponsors say that the bill is to increase transparency and accountability for charter schools. In practice, a lot of what the bill will do, my personal opinion, I'm not here to tell you what I think, this is my personal opinion, the bill would start to usurp local school boards' authority to make determinations in the best interest of their students and community when it comes to charters. It would become much harder to approve charter applications, it would become much easier to reject them, and then it would become harder to appeal those decisions after the fact as a baseline, and that's before you dig into all the stuff related to charter board governance and things that obviously are going to play into offensive conversations. So, whatever the ultimate intent is, hard to say, the underground application would get an awful lot more complicated, both for charters and for authorizers over the past.
What it sounds like.
So, we have 500-ish other bills that we could talk about, but I'm guessing we don't want to, so we can probably leave it there. I'm happy to answer questions before we break officially for lunch. Similarly, Ken, if there's anything we forgot or anything we didn't get, send it to them.
You covered the agenda, we've been on quite well. So I want to say thank you to both of our presenters and our facilitators, as both roles. You guys have done a great job today.
Yes, thank you.
And we deeply appreciate the thoughtfulness that is on today.
Absolutely. Okay, well, then, I don't think we need a vote to adjourn. Call it a day or anything like that.
Let's do adjourn. Let me ask our attorney a question.
Yes, sir.
As this board will continue present to eat together, should they adjourn after lunch or before? I think that's it.
I would adjourn the meeting. Yeah.
Thank you. Would you move to adjourn? Would someone move to adjourn?
I don't think I have a motion to adjourn. We adjourn.
We're not familiar with that. Oh, okay. We can just go down there first. You want to go down there? Only if you want. I don't.